Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this COPA Safety Seminar, Communications and Meteorology. I am joined by Michael Oxner, who's a controller out in New Brunswick, and Sophie Spluinski, who is the manager of Network Aviation Weather for NAV Canada. Little overview of today's agenda. Sophie Spluinski is going to talk about NAV Canada's AVMET system, their new online platform for all things meteorology, and a really good tool for pilots starting already flying to give them a good overview of meteorology. And then Mike's going to speak about VFR phraseology as a man who does it as his bread and butter and hears it every day and knows a thing or two about it. So we'll have a short break in about an hour's time. We will do a Q&A at the end of the presentations. If you have any questions throughout, I'll try and ask them, but we'll leave most of the questions until at the end of the presentations. This seminar does qualify for 24-month pilot recurrent training program for your logbook. Here are the details. I will include these in the chat, especially at the end. The presentation name is COPA Safety Seminar, Communications and Meteorology. You will have to put that it's online, the date, and then presenters, which is Sophie Spluinski and Michael Oxner for COPA. Now, getting right into it. Sophie, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thanks so much to George for giving me the opportunity to come here and present. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Really excited to share this with everybody here today. So won't be taking too much of a time. Oh, sorry, I will move this out of the way here. Won't spend too much time in PowerPoint. We'll get to the good stuff and actually give everyone a run through of the website itself. And like George said, if you do have any questions, please by all means put them into the Q&A section of the chat. Je suis aussi bilingue. Alors, s'il y a des personnes qui sont sur la rencontre, qui aiment plus parler en français, demander leurs questions en français ou les poser en français dans le chat, sentez-vous confortable de le faire et je vais vous répondre en français aussi si c'est nécessaire. And I'll translate that in English as well. So any questions that are asked in French, I will do my best to translate back into English for the rest of the group as well. All right, so getting started, when we think about the aviation meteorology reference and weather and safety as a whole, it really is at the center of everything that we do. And why is weather so particular? So if we think about all of the different roles that we have across the industry, weather impacts us all, but it can impact us all differently. So if we're thinking about something like snow, and I know we just came out of winter, but it's a good example. If we think about snow and we think about what it means to a pilot that's flying a Cessna or a pilot that's flying an A330 or air traffic control in a terminal or an airport authority, all of their different concerns, constraints, how they plan for an event, how they go into and come out of an event, those all have a different approach, even though we're all trying to get to the same point. So the idea that we can understand how it impacts us is important, and it is the leading safety concern for all phases of flight. It's also a critical component for all operations. So whether you're in the air or on the ground, weather has those impacts that remain important across the board. Outside of just the space that we're thinking about in general aviation, it's also a critical air traffic flow management and collaborative decision-making component. So whether some of the research studies out in the United States have shown that it's responsible for about 70% of all delays that are ever issued. So it introduces dynamic factors, introduces risks and uncertainty, which add to the complexity of any situation, whether you're looking at it from an ATFM perspective or a go, no-go perspective as a pilot. So the idea behind AVMET is really thinking about how safety starts in the classroom and better understanding the weather fundamentals and better understanding how weather impacts aviation operations. So because safety is truly embedded in every decision that we have to make, the idea behind this project and the idea behind this website was to help improve the way that we understand weather and help improve the way that we understand how weather impacts each of us across different parts of the industry to get a stronger view of the picture as a whole. So the aviation meteorology reference was built on all four of NAV Canada's pillar. We basically started off by thinking about a new way of learning about aviation weather. If you're thinking about all of the different resources that are out there, if you're thinking about all of the things that you potentially wish that you had, we started with a blank slate and started to think about, okay, well, how can we potentially come about this differently? And within that space, what we ended up recognizing is this idea of partnership. So everything that you see on the website, and we'll go through it in more detail, revolves around this idea of partnership. So we ended up collaborating with folks from across the industry to build this out because there are so many different impacts that weather can have, and there's so many different perspectives that bring this unique knowledge that we'd like to share with others. In looking at those partnerships, we also recognized that there was a clear need to go right to the operational front lines. So everything that you see on the website itself, we really did lean on folks who work in those operational spaces. So whether it's air traffic controllers, general aviation pilots, commercial pilots, airport authorities, all of those different voices are present here. And from a weather perspective as well, having folks who are ICAO certified aviation meteorologists develop the content was important to us. And at the end of the day, being able to go through leveraging this expertise, building out these partnerships, and trying to innovate something new to fill out some of those gaps that already existed. It was this idea of having safety at our core. So because weather affects us all, if we could build out this educational resource, the idea is that we could improve how folks learn and know about weather and then how they can apply it in an operational space. So a little bit more about AvMet itself. We tried to bridge the worlds of aviation and weather together as one. So as previously mentioned on the other slide, we did this by leveraging frontline expertise. And what we also tried to do is explore weather phenomena through real world examples. It's one of the things that I've started my PPL. I'm only about a dozen or 15 hours into it. I haven't soloed yet. I did have to press pause, but I'm working with my CFI and a couple of other folks in this space. One of the things that we had talked about is this lack of being able to really see examples and tether them to what we're actually going to see in our space within Canadian airspace and some of those real world examples. So we wanted to be able to bridge that gap by presenting what you'll see on the website a little later on. At the core, again, it comes back to that ability of being able to understand how weather impacts us all differently. And the why behind that is because aviation really is a complex system. So it's not only understanding the fundamentals of weather, but also those impacts that it has across the board. If you're thinking about thunderstorm season, which is ramping up now, it's being able to understand, okay, well, what's this terminal controller working with? How is their workload increasing? What are they working on their side? And similarly speaking, being able to look at what pilots are working on and what they're thinking about or what their workload looks like. If we can better understand those different impacts and roles that we are not ourselves in, the idea is that once we're in the air or once we're on the ground trying to figure out if we should go fly or not, it gives us an idea of better understanding what's happening and having better situational awareness. It also ties back into this idea of enhanced risk management, not just in the ATFM decision-making space, but also in the space of being able to figure out whether you're going to go or not go on any given flight. And finally, it's this idea of enhanced collaboration. So one of the best things that I had enjoyed in this project was really being able to work together with over 50 different people from across the industry and making it happen. And in the future, we're really hoping to see this grow. So we'll talk about that more on the last slide. Taking a look at things under the hood. So the content that you see on the weather page was entirely developed by ICAO certified aviation meteorologists. On the aviation side, as mentioned, it was SMEs from across the industry. So air traffic controllers, airport authorities, our National Traffic Management Unit, pilots, both from the general aviation community and commercial pilots, as well as some of the more major airlines. And we also have flight duty dispatchers that were providing some key information from their perspectives. So we had this cross-industry collaboration, both in the review and in the feedback space as well. The weather goal is to be able to translate that pure science to be aviation specific. So if we're thinking about opening up a textbook or just Googling freezing rain, for example, you're likely to see a lot of mathematical equations, a lot of potential, research papers or things that may not be necessarily catered to our industry and also catered to our industry specific to Canadian weather products that are available. So the idea was to provide some example of aviation weather forecast products and observations. And we also had the folks who work out CMAC who write out all of our TAFs, all of the GFAs, all of the weather forecast products that you will see on CFPS, for example. Those are available from folks that are issuing those products over at the Meteorological Service of Canada. They also came up with this idea of saying, hey, why don't we include forecasting challenges? So within each term, you'll see one portion of the website that's dedicated to what is called forecasting challenges, where you're going to get into the brain of a meteorologist and they'll talk about those days for thunderstorms, why on some days you see prob 30s for 4 hours and on other days they're prob 30s for 12 hours, which is everyone's favorite thing. So it's being able to understand a little of the why behind the science as it connects back to things that you will see in day-to-day operations. The aviation weather goal on that side is really to tie back those weather impacts to our operations. So it's user specific. We go through each of the different rules. And again, the content that is provided there is entirely from those perspectives. And we also provide examples of those weather impacts where possible. So it's something that, again, this was a very much grassroots initiative, and we're hoping to see it grow over time, hopefully with collaboration from folks from across the industry, including potentially folks on this call if they are interested. One of the really big things that I'd like to definitely make a point of underscoring here is that the content on AvMet is static and historical. So there are no live feeds or currently issued products. And there is a pop-up that you will see when you first visit the website that does provide recommendations in terms of having users follow their procedures from a day-to-day perspective when you're doing your flight plan and you're going about figuring out what you will do that day. And likewise, the importance of being able to contact and reach out to a FIC for our weather briefings, NOTAMs, all of your AIP supplements, AIC, and then all of your service notices. So that should remain unchanged. The resource itself is meant to be a supplemental resource on an off day, for example, if you're trying to go in and brush up on a couple of weather terms, and that would be how it would be leveraged. Day of, we would absolutely ask folks to stick to their usual procedures and make sure to follow those, including those weather briefings, which remain critically important to safety. The included weather terminology that we have within AvMet. So we started with 30 terms. That's the current availability of terms on the website. It's significant weather phenomena, terminology that are frequently used by aviation meteorologists, folks that were be a part of either the NOC calls if you were within the industry. So those are the conference calls that we have with the major airlines for traffic management initiatives at the four majors, or in FIC weather briefings on a day-to-day basis, day-to-day terminology. And this is hoping again to grow. So we've got about 150 terms on our list for the future. We have those 30 terms for now, but the hope is to see that grow over time. And one thing you'll notice on the website once we actually go through it is that the idea here is to make examples as visual as possible. So within each of the different terms that you have on the website, there is one historical event that's tied through them. So we'll go through one of those examples in a couple of minutes, but the idea here is to go through a forecast. So looking at graphical forecast areas, at TAFs, strategic charts, and then going through the observations. So radar imagery, satellite imagery, METARs, webcams, SIGMETs, etc. So it's really to be able to tell the story from A to Z, taking a look at the science behind the weather, and then tying that back very closely to what you're going to see in forecast, and then once again, what you will see in observations to give you that full picture from start to finish. So one of the things here that I really wanted to take a minute to highlight was just how much collaboration and how many folks really did work into building AvMet and making it possible. So this was built entirely from the ground up as a grassroots initiative. It was led by a very small group of folks who were just looking at building it in within their own network. It is where we are hoping to leverage and see this grow now that it's out there, to reach out to as many folks in the community who are passionate and would like to share perspectives. Absolutely open to that. The website is bilingual, it's free, and it's available worldwide. There is no login that is required. It has applicability across every role within the industry, and we'll take a look at that on the next slide. And also outside of the industry. So we've actually had universities who have leveraged this tool, the general public. There are a couple of airport authorities who have used it in terms of being able to have a teaching opportunity when we're thinking about why folks go to the airport and they see that their aircraft is delayed and their flight's delayed by a couple of hours. They've actually used some of these references and these terms on the site to be able to speak to that. So we've seen great collaborative engagement across the community. From our perspective, it's also an opportunity to really strengthen those partnerships. So when George had reached out and had given me the opportunity to come here to present, one of the biggest things that has made this website successful is that we have worked with the community, and we've only started to scratch the surface. So being able to reach out and give voices to folks in the field to say, hey, why don't you share your perspective with us? It's where I'm hoping to see this continue growing over time, and we're being able to not only share this resource with you, but also look to getting feedback and getting guidance and getting ideas. Absolutely welcome that as well. So we truly have set an industry benchmark for the possible. Just as an idea, I'd presented, I've met out in Brussels, and there were folks from some of the European airlines like Lufthansa and British Airways that had approached to say, hey, could we actually expand this to potentially include some more worldwide flavor? And we had a couple of folks who are international pilots who very rarely fly into Canadian airspace who had shared the ability of actually being able to better understand some of the inner workings of what happens in our airspace and how to potentially look at different forecast products that are available. So lots of opportunities for growth. But at the end of the day, AvMet really does highlight that importance and value of investing in people and their training, and really does underscore the difference that we can fundamentally make if we work together to enhance safety. So really, if you see this and it's something that speaks to you, please definitely reach out to us. This is some of the applicability that you see across the board. So there is worldwide impact that has been had here, and we do have folks from across the board that have been picking up on this. So even if you pick up the latest from the ground up issue, it was one of the big highlights for us was to see AvMet being mentioned there as well. And it's something that Transport Canada has also pre-approved as part of their annual recurrent program for pilots. So again, this is something that you might be able to leverage on your end. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out, and I'm happy to go digging for those answers if that helps. So in terms of next steps, and then I'll get to the good part, which is actually giving you a run through of the website. We've got those 30 terms. We do have 13 that are slated to be added in the near future. And our goal is, as I mentioned, the ability to continue growing this for an industry-wide collaboration. So if you'd like to get involved, reach out to us. If you do look at those terms and either there are things that are unclear or there's something missing from your perspective that you would see value in having added, absolutely also reach out to us. And that feedback really is going to be key to that development. If we get feedback of folks, really using it and having it support them in their training and in their development, we'd love to know that, because it helps us then bring that back on our side to help continue to spark that feed to actually continue to build it out. So you'll see it coming out in the safety letter at the FAA as well. And I've also provided some presentations to local flight schools and a couple of GA communities. But again, if you feel as though this would be something that could be shared on your side, happy to work with you as well to be able to keep that word going. So I will pause very quickly and ask George if there are any questions that folks might have before we get to the website itself.
We do have one question from Guy. Does it complete the information we get from ForeFlight? Which I imagine the question is, can you take the weather information you get from the ForeFlight app and use this information as a reference? Which I'm assuming that's kind of the point.
Right. So the website itself is not going to be supplementing anything that you see day of on ForeFlight. So it's not intended, it's not going to give you radar imagery or satellite imagery or any weather forecast products. However, what it could potentially do is if you're seeing thunderstorms on radar, for example, and you're like, well, what does this look like in a forecast product? Or I have questions about how thunderstorms form. This would be the place to go to be able to get a bit of that information. But in terms of supplementing what you will see on a day of basis from any other type of resource, this is absolutely not the website for that.
Which is an answer to Paul's question. Can you use the website while flying for live weather updates? No.
No. This is entirely meant to be a off day type of supplemental resource as an education. So anything day of, stick to your procedures, stick to getting your weather briefings or the tools that you already have that work for you. The idea of this website is to provide you additional information that will help support the understanding that you have of either when you get those flight briefings, what it actually means, or when you look at a TAF, when you look at a satellite image or any other graphical forecast area, hopefully it'll help your situational awareness and understanding what that potentially means.
One question from Jason in Perry Sound. Hey, Sophie, how much do the changes to government agencies in the US like NOAA impact your services?
So this in of itself here on AvMed, we are completely separate from any of the folks down in the FA and out at NOAA. So I'll only stick to that because I'm not a part of all of the other conversations. Any questions that have any relation to questions around, level of service or what we have available from a NAV Canada perspective, I'd absolutely just direct them to reach out to NAV Canada directly at customer service.
Adam asks, or basically states, so it's basically a weather encyclopedia.
Correct. And then we take it a step further, hopefully, once we show these examples of also not just being a weather encyclopedia, but also an aviation weather encyclopedia of the opposite side of the coin, which is not just weather, but also what it means to folks on the other side that have to fly through it or plan through it.
We've got a question. How is the system different from NAV Canada's CFPS data? I think we've kind of answered that. CFPS is live weather. This is more of an encyclopedia of a glossary of terms. And uh, Rob asks, are there 30 terms plus others to be added, part of international or national standards as a glossary? If so, what would you point to? Other 30
Absolutely.
terms.
So,
Okay.
no, so the first question, you nailed it. CFPS is operational day of. AvMet is strictly historical and off day, so educational. So that's something that is really important for us to underscore. And in terms of what we're going to continuously build out, so these are 30 terms for now. It was almost like a proof of concept that we wanted to launch the site. It's where we're looking for feedback. If you find this helpful, absolutely reach out to us so that we can pass that information along, because that's the sort of feedback that we'll look at to be able to then garner that momentum to keep building things out. And in terms of what glossary is available, I'll definitely take that away in terms of what terms we have on our docket. But if you're seeing a term that's missing, please feel free to underscore it to us in an email, and we'll make sure to highlight that in that pile to make sure that it's there.
Looks like we're good on questions for now. If you have a slide at the end with an email, I'll make sure I include that in the chat for anyone that has any feedback.
Yeah, so I do have that here, and I apologize because I skipped through that. So if you would like, I can also take a screenshot and drop it into chat after. So the website is listed here. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And if you do have any questions directly about the website, you can reach out to our team at watt@navcanada.ca. So George, I'll let you share that with folks. And I'm also happy if you'd like to just take a screenshot and drop it in the chat.
Awesome.
Great. So thanks so much for those questions. We'll go through a quick example here, and then I'll leave some time because I definitely would like to have more of a discussion, let folks ask more questions as well. So once you get onto the site, that pop-up that was there, it's not here right now, but you'll see it and you'll have to acknowledge it. And you'll see this pop-up this text box right here that does provide the information of this website being static and historical. So great questions from folks. It's great to underscore this time and time again that this is not meant for operational use. So all of the information and numbers are provided here for folks who would like to get weather briefings, and CFPS, if that's your go-to site, that should remain unchanged. So once you get to the site, you can look up a weather term. This works like a Google search. If you type it in here, it will pop up. You can also look by alphabetically by the letters themselves, or if you'd like to see all of the terms all together, you just click on this button right here to review all the terms. So if you're curious about what went into the aviation meteorology reference, so you'll get this page of who we are, what we do, and some of our contributors. So we had, like I said, over 50 different folks who contributed to this content, and I hope that we will see this grow. There are so many voices and so many perspectives that we could add to this space that aren't yet available. So really hope to see this come through and get bigger in the future. So if we go down to all of the terms, and I'll go to thunderstorms. I'm not going to penalize anybody by looking at snow because we've had enough of that for this year. So all of the content is listed here. I'll scroll down to thunderstorms here. So all of these different terms will bring you to the same website. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we got to this page was in building it out, I don't like doom scrolling. I hate pop-up windows. I hate this idea of having to click backwards and forwards. And so we had some of these terms like thunderstorms that had over 40 pages of content. Some of them are much lighter, some of them are going to be much heavier. And we wanted to put everything onto one web page. And the enterprise business solution team over at Nav Canada, I've got to give them massive kudos because they ended up recreating our mock-ups that we put up basically on pen and paper and came up with this output. So everything that you see is all on one web page, and it all has these tabular format across the board to be able to get to what you need. So once you're on this page, if you're looking more at the Met section, you stick with the meteorology tab. If you'd like to focus on the aviation section, you just click over to this tab and it will bring you to that page. So within the Met section, if we just take a look, each of the terms will have the meteor code and weather symbol provided if it's applicable. There will be a list of hazards. And then in this about section, you'll get a short definition of the term, and you'll also see this associated terms coming soon, which will list some of these terms that aren't yet available that we're working on and hopefully will make available soon. And these associated terms, what they are is when you go through a class, if folks have gone through their Met training for their PPL, for example, oftentimes you'll go through each of these different weather phenomena, but it's not necessarily obvious which ones are connected to one another. So what we try to do here is remove all doubt and make it explicitly known that, hey, if you hear thunderstorms, here are all of these other terms that we already have available or those that are coming soon that you could also hear at the same time. So what it allows for us to be able to do is to get users to say, okay, I'm good with thunderstorms, but I really have no idea what a shortwave trough is. And so they can click on this term, it'll bring them to that page, and that hyperlink will allow for them to, again, learn the intricacies of that term itself and connect it back to what it means for thunderstorms. So this was one of those things that we tried to do, again, to make things absolutely clear and to make those connections more intrinsics for users. The bread and butter, or the meat and potatoes of the Met section, is this visualization section. So I'd previously talked about going through this story from A to Z. The Science Explained section is basically going to be the Coles notes of what you see in From the Ground Up, what you will see explained in your Met courses, and it's intended again to be supplemental. So you'll see that it's not going to go into how to read a TAF or how to read a METAR. The understanding is that you come in here with those fundamentals and also a fundamental understanding of basic thunderstorms, and it's meant to be a refresher. So within this space, you'll have a couple of different sub-tabs that you can click through. Necessary ingredients, you have this carousel when it's available. You'll have the image on the left, and then you can basically scroll a little bit here on the right. And you'll notice that there are a couple of rabbit holes that we provided for those who are big weather nerds and want to go more into in depth, for example, on a couple of terms. For anyone who's familiar with the COMET program, they do have a couple of phenomenal courses that are available that went beyond the scope of what we are trying to do here, but we do provide that there in case folks do want to go into more depth. So reading through this, once you're done with that, you can go through this carousel, and it basically looks like a textbook. So you can click through all of the different slides here for necessary ingredients. It'll give you the number of images that you see here. And we have the ability to put in videos, animations, static images in this space as well. So again, it allows for you to quickly click through those to be able to get from one to the other. And we go through dissipation as well. One of the big things in weather and in aviation, when's it going to start, when's it going to stop, and how bad is it going to be? So one of the things that we definitely wanted to touch on were these dissipation parameters and duration. So it's one of those topics that become critically important for all phases of flight planning. Climatology for those interested as well. And then those forecasting challenges I had mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation. The idea here really was to get into the brains of meteorologists and explain really what they are looking at and where some of those areas of uncertainty can come up when it depends on, when thunderstorms are going to form, what triggers they might be looking for, and where that variability can lie. So that, again, when you see that TAF or you see a forecast, you can better understand the underlying mechanisms behind it. So this is all
Sophie,
of oh yeah, go ahead.
just a bit of a question on my end. Are you able to zoom in just a tiny bit? I think some people are having a hard time kind of being able to see the text.
Yep. And let me know if this is better. There's also, I am not a Teams guru, but there is also the ability on Teams to take control of the screen and zoom in on your own. If folks are familiar with that option, I can zoom in a little bit more. George, is this any better?
It's better for me. You're exactly right. If you look down in the bottom left of what Sophie's presenting, there is a plus and a minus symbol. So you should be able to zoom in the screen if you're having a hard time seeing. Thanks, Sophie.
Perfect. Thanks, George. So hopefully it wasn't completely lost on folks, but by all means, please feel free to go in and play along on the website as well if you'd like to take a look at some of the concepts that we had just covered. In the forecast tab, so this is again one historical example. This is not a live feed. This is an example from August of 2023. And what we're looking at here, we go through GFAs, TAFs, vertical profiles of the atmosphere, and then a couple of forecast models to again look through things. So the idea behind picturing these GFAs, anyone who looked at this for the first time, including me when I first started training, my background is I used to be an aviation meteorologist before I joined NAV. I worked with the Meteorological Service of Canada for almost a decade. So I used to create these charts, and when we first started to learn about them, it did not look like anything that was comprehensible. So when we started to build it out, the idea was to, in plain English, on the right-hand side of the text, break down what it was that folks are seeing in this graphical forecast area, and then connect it to things in a TAF. So starting with the big picture and then really zooming in on, this is a TAF for Ottawa Airport, again, at that same time period, and walking folks through, again, this TAF is alphanumeric, and it might be hard to discern, especially for first-time users and folks who are just very new to the aviation industry and flying as a whole. So the idea here was to break things down in plain English on the right-hand side to be able to explain exactly what this means, and again, tying it back to that GFA. TAFs themselves are only valid for 5 nautical miles of a ring around the airport. So we definitely wanted to find a way to tie it back to the bigger picture so that folks don't forget to take a look at what else is going around the region that is just outside of that 5 nautical mile radius for the TAF. Vertical profiles, so this we bounced around as whether or not it would be outside of the scope because it is more advanced and not everybody is comfortable using them. However, we did get feedback from the industry folks that it is being used in ops, especially in the dispatch world. So we chose to include it, and it also facilitated our ability to talk about some things like atmospheric instability or radiation fog formation, because it is so deeply tied to those vertical slices of the atmosphere. So they are present here. And finally, from a strategic chart perspective, this is an animation from one forecast model that was issued that day. And what we tried to do here is, again, we tried to tie it back to what was actually causing those storms. So here you'll see the word trigger, and what you'll notice is that in the Science Explained section, we talk about triggers. So this is the way that we try to approach being able to tie back what somebody might see in a forecast, for example, to the fundamentals that you learn in a classroom, just so that it's more explicitly shown, for example, in that GFA, and saying, okay, here's your cold front, and here's what it looked like in forecast models. Finally, this is the observation section. So this is, again, the same exact image taken from that day. So this was on in August there of 2023. And on August 3rd, what we're looking at here is the satellite image that was the live image shown on that day for those thunderstorms that were popping up across southern Ontario and southern Quebec. So just geographically speaking, Montreal is right here. You've got Toronto right here, and you've got the Great Lakes that are located here. So it was being able to, again, tie it back to what you would see in the GFA so that folks can click back and forth between what was shown in the forecast and much more readily observe what's being seen in observations to make those connections together. Just as we did in the forecast side, we also tried to explicitly draw out that cold front formation to, again, make it clear to users, hey, when we're talking about triggers and when we're talking about what could potentially have those thunderstorms start to pop up, cold front being those leading cause makers for this type of development, we definitely wanted to take the chance to highlight that. We did the same thing for radar imagery. So again, this is just one radar image taken from that day. And then once again, drawing out that cold front to be able to talk through some of the triggers that were associated with thunderstorm development. SIGMETs and AirMets tend to be graphical in nature, but again, because this is historical, it really was tied back to what we were able to grab. But these are things that you'll notice in the clear turbulence term, for example, that you will see a graphical output for it. And finally, for the METARs, it was being able to tie that back to the TAF. So it's walking folks through the science behind the term, looking at what it looked like in that forecast for a historical example, and then tying it back to what it actually looked like in observations that day, and allowing for folks to click back and forth between, let's say, the METARs and going to the TAF to see what it looked like and what actually ended up happening. So a couple of the different things that you will see on the site, depending on the term, you will see potentially other sub tabs that are added here. If you look at the radiation fog example, then you'll notice that we have other observations that are webcams. And we basically looked at webcams from the day of taken at 2 separate airports in Montreal and in Saint-Hubert in Quebec. to look at the before and afters of when radiation fog was forming. So this is the Met section, and I'll take a quick stab at the aviation section before turning it over for some discussions. If I have time, I'll quickly show you some of those examples from two other terms that are pretty unique. So on the aviation section, the main concerns that are listed here are basically translating the hazards that we showed on the Met section to what it would actually mean in aviation speak. So when we're talking about thunderstorms, you might talk about microburst risks or risks of strong wind. Here we could talk about loss or gain of speed, loss of lift. So we're trying to really translate that more into a language that is more familiar to pilots. And then once we get down into this next section, we've broken it up into service providers and users. So within the service provider section, here you'll see, again, these are SMEs from the front lines within these roles. We've got airport authorities, both Vancouver Airport Authority and the GTA provided feedback. We've also go through major towers and regional towers. From the area control center perspective, these are operations duty managers. So the folks that basically run all the different traffic management initiatives into the four majors and also manage the FIRs as a whole. These are all of the questions that they might have in terms of planning out different TMIs at different major airports and being able to essentially make go, no-go decisions and strategic plans for whether or not we're going to have to implement any delays to make sure that we are maintaining a safe and efficient flow of traffic through the airspace. Finally, we also had feedback from our flight service specialists, and they provide all of the weather briefings that you see and also advisory specialists that you will talk to at different sites. So again, some critically important information that's provided here from their perspective. Within the on-route section, the terminal airspace, for example, this is specific to Montreal's ATC. So when I talked about seeing this grow over time, the hope is that we could gain perspectives from other parts of our airspace across Canada because it is so wide and is so vastly different in times. But here it's really thinking about, okay, well, what does it mean to controllers? Terminal controllers I worked with here had a lot to say, but you could get an idea of how their workload changes, how they actually change how they workflow. So working both arrivals and departures together rather than working, having two controllers, one working departures and one working arrivals. This really will break down how that happens and again give you a little bit more of a vantage point in terms of how an air traffic controller's workload and what happens on frequency may shift when they start to see thunderstorms. We also have low-level ATC and high-level ATC providing feedback here as well, and our specialists over at the National Traffic Management Unit that handle all of the flow across the four majors and also across the country as a whole. So lots of great information there from a service provider perspective. And then from a user's perspective, we've got our commercial flight dispatchers that provided a significant number of amount of information in terms of what they look at, what their concerns are, how do they plan for it, and what the potential impacts are from their planning and execution perspective. Commercial pilots, we had a couple of images that were provided by some commercial pilots across the board. So it was great to see. Again, for those of us, there are folks who may not ever end up in a cockpit who will still work the frequency. There's a controller or a flight service specialist and being able to see some of those perspectives. So this is just a short video, again, just to provide a vantage point in terms of what pilots see in the cockpit when they're trying to navigate around thunderstorms. And finally, from a GA perspective, being able to give an overview of what general aviation pilots are going to be looking at prior to a flight, and then what their concerns are in flight as well. So again, folks on this call, with all of the different backgrounds that are likely here, any feedback here and would be absolutely welcome. So this is one term as a whole. Like I mentioned, there are 30 that are available. I'll quickly show you the example of that radiation fog when we went into the meteorology section in the observation. So we had this satellite image of a fog event across the St. Lawrence River Valley and down into the Champlain Valley heading into Vermont. And when we looked at the METARs, we were able to see those low conditions both in Montreal and in Saint-Hubert. And what we actually see if we look at the other observations, it's again trying to tie it back to what folks will see in a tower, for example. So this was a view that was taken from Montreal's tower, and I was actually working the floor that morning in Montreal, and I called the tower up and asked the supervisor, who was not on the desk at that time, to take a picture of what it looked like. So this was taken that same morning. So when we talk about low vis operations or restricted vis operations, these are important things to be able to show to pilots that are either coming into the system or again, just as a refresher when we start to go into fog season. So this is just the Saint Hubert picture. And again, this was the webcam shot that was taken that morning. So a lot of great information here, again, from a training perspective, from a knowledge perspective, a refresher perspective, to be able to share. And I think I'll stop there. George, I'll hand it back over to you. I'll leave my screen up here with my contact information and with the website information. But what I'll do right now is I'll take any questions, thoughts, comments. Floor is over to everyone here. And thanks again for having me here to show this to you all.
Thank you, Sophie. I think this is probably the third time I've seen this presentation, but hey, it gets better each time and I learn more each time. So
Appreciate
an
it.
awesome tool. We have a few questions. If you haven't asked your question yet, any questions or comments that you want um, answered here, please put them in the meeting chat or in the Q&A section. What do we have? Oh, we've got a suggestion. Is there a book version of the information provided in the website?
So
Maybe when
no,
it's
there
finished?
there is no book version, but the website is completely tailored to be available and working on a desktop, a tablet, and a cell phone. So we did configure it in a way that allows for the content to be legible and useful on all three different types of sources. So we don't have a hard copy version, but it does work on all of those different types of devices.
Paul is asking, can you drag and drop a GFA and it will explain what the GFA is stating?
No,
That's
unfortunately, we do not have that type of AI. That would be really cool.
I was just thinking that that seems like might take a little bit of coding, but that would be a that'd be really interesting. In the meantime, it's I guess it's in the idea pile. Brian, SKUT log P. I think Brian knows his stuff. That's
Mhm.
type of graph, I believe.
So yes, there is the different in Canada, we are often more likely to see tephigrams, and in the United States, it is more often to be SKUTs. We aren't expecting folks to be able to recognize the difference. So awesome kudos to you for being able to pick up on that. The idea is that when we're talking about the content that will be provided that speaks to the different sounding profiles is not going to be talking about enough information like the different moist or dry adiabatic lap rates to make that difference I would say critical to the understanding of what it is that we're trying to underscore. And where possible, we did try to use tephigrams. It was just that some of the models that are provided, the ways that the screenshots were taken to facilitate the communication of what was actually being shown, oftentimes it was unfortunately the SKUT.
I'm muted. Ryan also says, well, this imagery brings it all together. Well done. John says this looks like it will be a great teaching tool. Um, they can see many training syllabuses being updated to include AdMet. Alex asks, how do you get the TAFs in plain language? Um,
There's a whole bunch of apps that allow for you to do
mm,
that. So I know that I have AeroWeather on my phone, I believe, where it allows for you to either take a look at current TAFs that are either in raw format or in translated format. So again, if this is a day of thing, there's a couple of great resources or apps available that will do it. And the idea here again is because it's a supplemental guide, the understanding is that folks are coming in here understanding how to read the TAF. What we're trying to get to is how do you read between the lines and what's the meteorologist actually trying to say? So if you're seeing a prob 30 in a TAF and you're seeing trends happen from a prob 30 to, or sorry, a VCTS to a prob 30 to a prob 40 to a tempo, what does that actually mean is what we're hoping to be able to dig into a little bit deeper here.
I'm an avid Windy user, and there's a nice little toggle on there which will convert it over, which is very handy. But there are still some things that even Windy gets confused. I mean, coming to Canada, learning about things like diamond dust. I had to look that one up. That one was new to me. Keith asks, "Hello, is there a weather product that can tell how many cloud layers there are and their heights?" It's an interesting one, Keith.
Uh, the question I would have here is if it is a forecast product or in observations, the METAR will obviously have those different cloud heights that will be listed and the number of octas that each cloud deck will have. So I'm not sure I understand the question. Happy
Yeah.
to expand on that.
Uh, Roger asks, how does AvMet relate to the NavCan, the weather of regions volumes published?
That's an amazing question. So, the way that we are looking at it here is we try to instead of just looking, so the regional information that's provided in those books is so critical because it looks at all of the different local effects of Deer Lake or St. John's or Boundary Bay, and it'll break down all of the different seasonal variabilities that you might see or predominant winds. Here, what we are trying to do is take a completely different vantage point, which is really going back into, let's just dig deeper into the impacts that weather has on ops, talk about that, and just provide more historical examples of a phenomenon that is just focused on the weather itself and not necessarily those regional implications. So again, this being a supplement, I could see that getting paired really well with some of those local effects that you might see. And even if you talk about triggers, for example, if you're seeing triggers for like upslope flow in certain airports, then you might be able to tie that back to what you're going to see in some of those necessary ingredients for thunderstorm formation, for example.
We got great work with AvMet. Can you make the web pages print friendly if we want to provide them as hard copies to students?
That is a great suggestion. We do have print capabilities, if I'm not mistaken, or at least I'll have to take that away. So George, if there's or if I'm not sure, the whoever asked that question, if you're curious, please reach out to watt@navcanada.ca. I can dig into it a little bit more because we did talk about that, but I do know that within the terms themselves, if I just click on one, we are able to, let's say, copy contents to a clipboard to then put it in. But in terms of printing a whole page, the difficulty around it was really the fact that we tried as much as possible to not doom scroll. So trying to get 40 pages to print out at once, we had to pick or choose between what we wanted. And the idea was to make it as user friendly as possible, as is on the website. So at this stage, I don't see us getting to a point where we're going to be able to take this all apart and put it into 40 different pages that folks would be able to print. So that might not be the ideal answer, but it's a great takeaway and feedback that we can consider for future potential development and capabilities.
Awesome. John makes a point about commercial pilots, meaning airline or high-level airspace pilots. All flight instructors and general aviation pilots are commercial pilots too, and operate in low-level airspace. I think the point really is that this is available for everyone, be it GA, doing commercial training in commercial operations, and sorry, commercial being, John, either the small, smaller operators, float operators, and flight instructors, or high level, wide body, narrow body airline pilots. I think it's a tool for all, I'd argue.
Yes, so it has applicability. We've got dispatch flight schools and flight schools that are taking on brand new students that are leveraging this, but we also have major commercial carriers whose chief pilots have basically incorporated this into their annual or current training. We've got the airlines that have incorporated this into their dispatcher training. So there is, whether it's used as a first time glance or whether it's used in terms of annual recurrent training or refreshers, there is a ton of applicability across the board. And if the question was, do you have, commercial pilots that could be wide body, but also, fly much smaller aircraft, for example, and still be represented? This is where we only have that small vantage point. If you do see something that is missing within the content that you would like to share, we would love to hear from you because I can guarantee you that this is incomplete. There's no way that we could cover all of Canada and every single different perspective with the grassroots that we started with. So we absolutely welcome additional feedback. And really the big point I would make is that if this is helpful, if you do see this get integrated into your training, please let us know, because that's how we bring that comment back to be able to help with its development. If we don't hear anything, it's hard to be able to keep that momentum going in terms of investing and continuing to develop this. So that's very important. And for us, it's something that we've seen bring a lot of positive. So hopefully we see that continue.
Awesome. Alex points out that the CFPS actually allows TAFs in plain language, which is awesome. Paul, what college, university, or other institution offers courses in meteorology?
So
That's a
great
good question.
question. So in Canada, this has changed over time. So I do know. So I graduated from McGill. McGill has a fantastic course that offers atmospheric sciences. And I don't want to speak too much for some of the other courses that might be available. We can take that as a takeaway, but I'm happy to follow up on that. I know it's a little outside of the scope of AvMet, but if there's any interest in that, I'm more than happy to take it away.
have two questions in the Q&A section. With the US Aviation Weather Center, I find the prog chart option that goes 5 days out very helpful in planning. Will Nav Canada offer this in the future, or is there already a tab for this?
Yep. So these are all things that are definitely outside of the scope of AvMet. We are continuously trying to look at how we can improve the products and services that we are providing. So yes, absolutely. There's a lot that has happened over the years that has gone further in time. And the idea is to, again, be able to bring that back and have those discussions so that we make sure that when we do start to have this idea of bringing in new products, that we look at leveraging not just what is possible out in the realm of aviation weather, but also what potentially hasn't been thought of yet that we might be able to do. So definitely something that is going to be taken into consideration in the coming years.
Alan has a question, a little bit of feedback. How many terms are being planned at this point with only 30? It would be easier to use to see all the terms in one menu rather than break it down into sub-menus by first letter, the line showing ABC, etc.
Yep. So the idea is if we are able to continue building this out, and if there's an appetite to build it out, then we've got over 150 terms. So being able to see it would definitely populate. I will admit that if you click on A and you see one or two terms, it's not necessarily the most appealing thing. So definitely note that for feedback and thank you for providing that. The hope is that we will be able to add those terms in and over time see that list grow.
Awesome. Linton, I see that your hand is up. Unfortunately, with the way we have the seminar set up, you aren't able to ask any questions directly. So please put them either in the chat or the Q&A to ask that question. But that's all I have for now. Oh, do we have another one? Oh, we do. I don't see any of the tabs on AvMet for the various classes of information you showed. Can you explain how to access them? I only see the alphabet list.
Oh, okay. So if we click on and we go to this main page, it's just to scroll down to see all terms. So here is where you see that alphabet list that we were talking about that only has two terms right now. But once you get to the see all terms page, you just click on that and you'll be able to scroll down and get all 30 terms that are listed below.
Awesome. Another question just popped in. The national webcam camera map page is absolutely great for home computers, laptops, but extremely clunky for iPads, iPhones. It's very difficult to open the different camera views at times, and it's frustrating. We use iPads in our aircraft, not PCs. Could this be addressed? Is that an AV Canada service?
I will take that away. I have to dig in more into that because that's definitely not my wheelhouse. So appreciate the feedback. It's always important. It's great to hear feedback from the users in the field. It's something that is at the core of what we're trying to hopefully, continue to do. So I will take that away. But I would say if there are questions or if there's feedback to direct that to customer service again, because that's very much outside of my wheelhouse.
Michael asks a very good question. Is there an upcoming term that you would like GA pilots to help collecting in-air or on the ground images for you?
Oh boy. Oh, that's a don't that you're going to open a rock or turn over a rock that I'm not sure you want to look under. So you'll notice that we are quite short in terms of even the images that are provided. So it's relatively painless and quick for us to be able to, even on the terms that you do see, if you have a great image that you would like to be able to share, by all means, please just send it to us. If there are terms that you see on there that again speak more to you, yeah, we are 100% open to that.
I will say that COPA and I guess NAV as well doesn't encourage you to fly into particularly uh, convective weather, serious weather conditions to be able to take
Yes.
photos for the site. As much as it would be nice to have those photos, please, yeah, flow responsibly and don't go out of your way, shall we say? Uh,
Thank you, George. Yep, that is absolutely important to mention. So,
just adding a little disclaimer. Some of the photos they're from an airliner. They're way up in the sky in much safer conditions than a little Cessna bouncing around. So,
yep.
but no, that was a very very good question from Michael because hey, we all love pictures. Speaks a thousand words. And it looks like I'm just going to double check. I think we're good for questions for now. I am just going to put the email address in the chat again for anyone that wants to send any feedback, comments, questions directly to the team. But yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. We have a few questions on recurrency. I will be sending a form at the end of this seminar in a link for people to fill out their details. But in the meantime, I think we probably move to a 10-minute break. So yeah, thank you, Sophie, and we'll see everyone back here in 25 to the hour, whatever your time is.
Thanks so much, George. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we are back. I hope everyone had a time to refresh, grab a drink or a bite to eat, and we are on to the second half of this seminar, which is going to be Mike on VFR phraseology. Over to you, Mike.
All right. Well, welcome back. This presentation was originally done 3 years ago, um, and it seemed to be enjoyed at the time. Well, they asked me to do a recording of it, and now they've asked me to present again. So my name is Michael Oxner, and this is the VFR Phraseology Seminar. So now if I can get this thing to work properly for me, we'll see. Okay, so here's the agenda. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, discuss a variety of topics, including some things from NAV Canada's VFR phraseology document, if you haven't seen that. A little bit about transponder operation, some thoughts about radio and radio telephony. I'll do a brief walkthrough of airspace classification because I find that's a fairly important thing. We have to know what's expected of us, both controllers and pilots. I'll give you a few of my own thoughts about emergencies and give you a little peek at what you look like on an ATC radar screen. And plus, I'll stick around for the open Q&A period that follows as well. That's the part that I find most interesting because there's always questions that I don't even think to answer, the things that don't come up in books and whatnot. So it's nice to have that around. So who am I? I'm an air traffic controller, operational currently in Moncton Centre. The first 2 years of my career were spent in Halifax Tower at the airport in Nova Scotia. And this says 30 years operational, but it's actually 32 now because, I'm getting older. But all of my time in Moncton ACC has been spent in the low-level en route specialty, which also doubles as a terminal specialty for a couple of our airports. For a long time, I was heavily involved in training, but my real passion is equipment installation and improvement and procedures as well. I like to have this stuff, I like to have things working right. I was also the team lead in our maritime airspace modernization project, and that was a project that lasted overall about 5 years, where we redid all of the instrument approach procedures, and including the STARS and SIDS at our busier IFR airports, most notably Halifax, but also some of the others. From a pilot side, I have a pilot's license. I got that in 1988. And I don't have a lot of hours, although I just recently got into a partnership on a plane, and I'm very happy to say that I'm actually flying much more frequently now and enjoying it as much as ever. Now, what got me started in this kind of presentation is I began writing an article, Aviation Topic of the Week, 20 years ago, and I would delve into a specific topic related to aviation in Canada, write a detailed article about it. Got picked up for a daily blog, and then eventually I began writing for Canadian Aviator magazine, and I've been doing that for 20 years and still contribute. One of my feathers in my cap, if you will, is I got picked up for 3 of my articles for the Aviation Safety Letter. That's a point of pride for me. What I say is I don't know everything about anything, but I do know quite a bit about a lot. So that's not to say it's perfect. Lastly, I'd like to point out that for this presentation, at the time I originally made it, I was not acting as a NAV Canada representative, but then most of these views are actually my own. However, I did consult with NAV Canada's Chris Reekin, who was overseeing this sort of topic at the time, and he and I actually collaborated on a lot of it. So I invite you to take notes during the slideshow, any questions that might pop up, any clarifications you feel are needed, or even things I don't cover here in the Q&A we can talk about after. I will try to address anything that comes up. My personal philosophy in this sort of thing is the only stupid questions are those not asked. Chances are, if you're wondering something, somebody else probably is too, and it'd be a shame for neither of you to get your answer. And as far as I'm concerned, nothing is too small to ask about. It may well spark a discussion on another topic, and you just never know where it'll go from there, what you might learn. So when building this presentation, I made my own list of things that had been asked in forums similar to this, more live things with a group of people face-to-face as opposed to online, but some online as forums as well. And I compiled the common ones, and as well as my own observations while working control positions over the years. Then I consulted with Chris to see what he thought should be covered and realized that much of the content I planned on my own is actually well covered in NAV Canada's VFR phraseology document. If you haven't seen it, this book was created with input from Transport Canada, the major and regional airlines, as well as several flight schools across the country. It's available for download for free at NAV Canada's website at the link that's shown here. Alternatively, you can search for NAV Canada operational guides, and you'll find a lot more material there, not just this one. There's actually an IFR phraseology document as well. All interesting reads for the seasoned pilot as a refresher, and for the new pilot as well. So into this phraseology document, it's a good foundation for radio work. It starts with the basics, including the introduction to the document and how it's formatted, the phonetic alphabet, and the glossary of words and phrases that includes their meanings. It also includes call signs for various ATS units, that's air traffic services, and so that would include air traffic control and flight service specialists and the flight information centers, FICs or FIC. Several situation-specific phraseology examples in the document can be used to guide you in your radio usage. And NAV Canada also produced other useful documents, as I mentioned, in cooperation with users, including the IFR phraseology document. So included in the basics of the document and other items related to radio telephony. For example, in many contexts in radio telephony, it's considered inappropriate to group numbers and letters. So, for example, we had a call sign flying around our region as Golf, 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 Quebec. Everybody, pilot and controllers, called them Triple Golf, Quebec. Technically, that's not quite right. Also, controllers issuing heading 360. When we're supposed to take those numbers and not group them like that, as heading 360 has been confused with some pilots as do a 360, and it's not necessarily the pilot being dumb or anything like that. It's sometimes the radio transmission doesn't come out quite right. They hear 360 and there it is. Niner is something that I strongly encourage for use with altitudes. I always tell ATC students, always use Niner with altitudes and altimeter settings to make sure that it doesn't get mixed up with fives. As examples for that last point, considering altitudes 5 versus 9,000, especially in non-radar environments, because we don't have the ability to actually see a mode C. So if you say you're at 9,000, I think you say 5,000, it makes a very big difference in terms of separation. Also, altimeter setting. If I say 2952 or say 2952, for example, but it gets mistaken for 2992. That would have your altimeter show 400 feet higher than the aircraft actually is. This could be important on an approach in IMC, for example. But at the very least, if you're 400 feet off of where you're expected to be, that could put you very close to somebody else. There are, however, appropriate groupings of numbers. Giving numbers as hundreds, such as 700, or thousands, such as 4,000, that's fine. You don't have to say 4000. In fact, it's more cumbersome that way. RVRs, if you're familiar with those for the instrument pilots around. Weather in METAR and TAF, 4,700, again, for cloud heights. We can say aircraft types, such as a A320 or a 737. Decimals can often be omitted, such as with radio frequency assignments, but they do say they don't like hearing the word point. It's generally considered poor form for instead of decimal. On to standard phraseology. Aviation has a number of standardized words and phrases, and each has its own meaning. Why is it important? Using standard phraseology is good for pilots and controllers alike. Many of the phraseology standards have evolved over the years, commonly driven by miscommunications and misunderstandings, and sometimes unfortunate results. Using the standards helps reduce the number of miscommunications and their likelihood, especially for those whose native language is not English. This could also apply to pilots who primarily fly in Quebec and don't normally interact in English. Use of the words and phrases is highly recommended, and as always, there are situations that occur where these standards just don't cover what needs to be communicated, and in those cases, just try to be clear and concise. For the ATS side of the radios, us in air traffic control and flight services, NAV has always had a program with the intent of improving phraseologies for its employees. And in recent years, the program was revamped with huge emphasis on standard phraseology, hoping that they could limit regional deviations. What's said in Moncton's region might be different than what's said in Edmonton and so forth. And they want to try to get those sort of regional deviations eliminated. In an ideal world, a pilot crossing the country should be able to hear the same words and phrases and expect the same meanings in any given piece of airspace in the country. Similarly, it would be a good idea for pilots to use the same words and phrases no matter where they fly so that they can be understood too, but at least they have to understand what controllers are saying. We'll move on to transponders. Some of you may recognize the really old model up in the top right-hand corner of this slide. There are many myths about transponders, and some come down to phraseology. A lot of them do, actually. I'd like to dispel some of them here and start with some common RT, what is meant, and some notes about it. So first up in this list on the left is squawk ident. Obviously, this means to press and release the button marked ident. Please, only use this function when specifically asked. Don't use it when ATC assigns a new code unless they actually say it. Also, some pilots, when they check in on a new frequency, will hit the ident button when they first key their mic and say, we're with you, we're squawking ident. The trouble here is if the controller sees multiple targets on their display exhibiting that ident symbol, which is just their target symbol flashing, none of them can be considered identified, and the process has to start all over for each aircraft, so that takes time and attention. Recycle transponder. Turn it off for a few seconds, then turn it on. It's basically rebooting Windows. I'll recommend a minimum of 5 seconds as the off time because that's the update interval for our en route radars in Canada. And so that very clearly lets the controllers see the change on the screen. So now in this case, it's a code. So squawk 4342. This just means set a new code. Some people will set their transponder to standby, change the code, and then turn it on again. Now that's more of the older style. The transponder that's in our plane is a newer one, and that's not even an issue. But some transponders still have that the thumb wheels or something similar to it. But don't turn it to standby when you change the code because we need to see that target on our screen, and it's better for us to see the actual change associated with it as well. So we just don't want to lose sight of you on our screens. Squawk mode Charlie. You might alternately hear this squawk mode C or turn on your mode C. Just check your transponder, make sure your altitude reporting function is selected. We do see several pilots every now and then. Sometimes it's just a simple mistake. You hit the wrong button or move the switch to the wrong setting, whatever. And that brings us to our next point is to stop squawk mode Charlie or stop altitude squawk or turn off your mode C. Some transponders can't turn off the mode C without turning off the transponder altogether. I think most modern ones will. But if this is your case, advise the controller because they would much more likely want to have it on and be able to see you as opposed to not see anything at all, even if the wrong altitude is there. The term identified used to be radar identified. NAV has updated that a little bit because it's not just radar in our surveillance bag of tricks anymore. We got multilateration or MLAT. We have ADS-B, ground stations and satellites. So it's just identified. When you hear this term, ATC knows which target on the screen is yours. And if you're IFR, now you can emit position reports. There's not really a requirement of that for VFR. In any case, ATC may still ask you for a position report if you're identified, in which case, please do so. Being told you're identified means you're now being provided with surveillance services. And lastly, surveillance service terminated. There's more than just radar in the term, as I said. So we used to say radar service terminated, but surveillance service terminated is the new form. And it just means that ATC or FSS can no longer see you, and we will no longer be directly monitoring the progress of your flight. And moving on, why isn't it changing for me? There we go. Okay, so we'll talk about the operation of the transponders. Normally, you turn your transponder on when entering a runway for takeoff. Turn it off when you exit the runway after landing. The main reason for this from an ATC perspective is it reduces ground clutter on the controller's radar. That being said, there are some airports where controllers use transponder-based surveillance on the aerodrome surface. This is either ASD or, in some cases, MLAT. If they need you to do that, such direction will normally be published in the procedures section of the airport's CFS entry. There aren't many. Now, some aircraft have weight on wheel switch tied to their transponder, meaning you can't turn the or you can't keep the transponder on manually. If ATC wants your transponder on during taxi and you can't, just advise them and they'll figure something else out. Now, there's some airspace is designated as transponder airspace. This is all designated in the designated airspace handbook, and it usually has a note about it on the charts as well. It's separate from the classification of airspace, meaning A, B, C, D, or E. In fact, any controlled airspace could be designated as transponder airspace. Common question that we have is, should you keep a previously assigned code on the transponder if surveillance service is terminated? The old school direction, and still the typical one in the United States, is to squawk VFR, set it back to 1200. Now, the current way of looking at it, keeping the code selected allows ATS to keep an eye on you, even if your surveillance services have been terminated. We can still track you to some degree, and maybe you leave coverage and come back into coverage. If we still have that same transponder code on it, then we know that's probably you, even if we haven't positively identified you. So if you suffer an emergency of some kind and go to 7700, it's actually much easier for us to go back and look at the radar playback and see where you were, and then we can pass that information on to the Rescue Coordination Center and maybe speed up finding you if that's the case. So my recommendation for this is for the rest of your flight, if you're going from point A to point B and you were with ATC at some point, keep that code on the transponder unless you're specifically told to squawk 1200. And if you're doing a round robin, point A to B to C and then back to A, I would recommend you keep that code on your transponder throughout the flight, at least in Canadian airspace. So on to radio. Radio telephony, as much as an art as it is a science. So I'll give you some basics and maybe some good practices to consider as well. First, it's really easy when you're using the radio to clip your transmissions, especially when you're busy or a fast talker by nature. Clipping means you start talking before you actually get the key pressed, or you release the button before you're actually finished talking. And that often leaves a syllable or maybe a full word out, could change the nature of your communication. So to make sure that you're not clipping your transmissions, some people will recommend key your mic for a half a second just before you start talking, and make sure it's not released until everything you're saying gets out. The other thing is to keep a listening watch so you don't miss calls directed at you. It's common that pilots, we try to call them, and they're not listening right at that moment. So we need you to do a listening watch, because some of the items will give you are time critical, such as traffic pointouts, if you were on vectors or other turning instructions from ATC and so forth. Maybe you're in a busy circuit. Plus, staying tuned in can help you gather information to get the picture of what's going on, and it might help you anticipate conditions or traffic in the area in which you're flying. Sometimes recognizing that student pilots are out there and an instructor is training, that cockpit can get very busy inside with the instructor trying to coach the student. And sometimes we find that some instructors will turn down the volume of the ATC frequency a little bit for the sake of the conversation and the student. But this has led to missed calls from controllers. Again, some of those calls are time critical, and we need you to be able to listen. If you have to leave an ATC frequency to make a report, update a flight plan with FSS, whatever, please let the controller know. That way, if anything urgent is coming up, it can be given to you right then, because sometimes we have pilots who leave the frequency to do something, and we try to call them and tell them about traffic, and they're not there to hear us. All right, so when you're tuning in a new frequency, listen briefly before making a transmission. We have pilots at all different experience levels who will tune up a new frequency and just key up right away. And sometimes that leads to stepping on other pilots, trying to read back a clearance if they're making a request, whatever. And that always takes more time to sort out because we have to make sure we get that read back from the other pilot, and we have to listen to your call again. So all that takes time. The other thing is we get sometimes a pilot just breaks into a long transmission on initial contact, and this can cause ATC to miss other details like a landing clearance or a turn to a localizer or something else. So on initial contact, you check in with who you're looking to call and who you are, and then wait for a reply. So another thing, it's sometimes good to rehearse your intended transmission in your mind before keying the mic. I'm guilty of this. Every now and then I key the mic and I start saying something and I realize I said it wrong, and I try to salvage the transmission, and it just gets worse and worse. It'll happen to anybody, but rehearsing it in your mind before you key your mic can help you eliminate some unnecessary words, and that reduces the time of your transmission. And a controller's lifeblood is time on the radio. If we can't communicate, we can't do our job. They say common guidelines are to speak in a normal conversational tone and use a steady rate of speech. If you speak too loudly, you can overmodulate your voice, and that makes your transmission very hard to make out. And obviously, speaking softly means your transmission won't be heard in its entirety either, if at all. I do have a note that I'd like to say about that later when we talk about emergencies. So if a transmission will be long or include a large number of details, such as a routing request, a lot of waypoints, or you're going to tell the story of what your plans are, get ATC's attention first with your call sign and the purpose of the transmission, and let the controller get back to you to reply. That means they've gotten ready to listen to you and maybe have a pen and paper ready to make notes to make sure that they don't miss what you're saying. When it comes to identifying yourself on a radio call, on initial contact, give your aircraft type, your four-letter call sign. So, for example, Moncton Center, Skyhawk Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie. And in subsequent communications, once Moncton Center has replied, you can just use the last three letters. I think most pilots in Canada know this, but it is mentioned in the book, and I thought I'd bring that out because we do still have some pilots who will use all four letters. Listen out for similar sounding call signs. ATC often sees different or similar flight numbers for airlines. Sometimes it happens with aircraft registrations as well. For example, in Moncton Center, we had Golf Tango Delta India and Golf Tango India Delta, and they flew at the same time, two different flight schools. ATS personnel do have direction for advising when similar sounding call signs are on the frequency, so you should be given a heads up if there's somebody that they know is there. They may actually even identify or get you to identify yourself differently, such as to prefix your three-letter call sign with your aircraft type. So if we have, in the example on the slide, Cessna Alpha Bravo Charlie and Piper Alpha Bravo Charlie, if it's Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie and Foxtrot Alpha Bravo Charlie, we may need a way to differentiate between you. So if they tell you to do that, please comply with that so they can help get communications going. Readbacks is another big one. Some pilots read back a lot of information that we give. I've had entire weather sequences or traffic issued by a controller all read back to me. And quite often, all that's really required is an acknowledgement. And to acknowledge a transmission, just use your aircraft's call sign. So Alpha Bravo Charlie. What does require a readback? All IFR clearances must be read back. Hold short instructions, whether you're taxiing or given a landing clearance and told to hold short of an intersecting runway. Those all require readbacks. Just as an aside, the AIM tells us the phrase holding short is a position as opposed to a hold short instruction. So for example, India Delta Oscar, taxi to runway 05 via Alpha and Charlie, contact tower 118 holding short. it's telling him where to contact the tower as opposed to saying hold short. From a pilot's perspective, I get that and I still read it back. So if you do, it's just a cross check for my brain to make sure that I know where I'm going to be holding short. Instructions for crossing a runway must be specifically stated by a controller when issuing taxi instructions. And while the AIM recommends reading back runway crossing instructions, they aren't technically required. Like I just said, I think it's a good practice to read those crossing instructions back as a way to cement it in my own mind. Personally, I also recommend reading back altimeter settings when you're operating IFR. I think it's less critical when you're VFR, but I have heard many incorrect altimeter setting readbacks in the years I've worked, and this allows me to catch them quickly and help that pilot get the right setting. Now, as a quick note for those IFR pilots out there, when you're reading back your IFR clearances, try to read them back as they're issued. Some pilots read back items in random order as they can think of them, and scattering the elements of the clearance readback not only invites missing items, not only on the part of the pilot speaking them, but also on the controller trying to listen to the readback. But it may even change the interpretation of the instructions. So to aid a pilot in hearing the elements of a clearance correctly, ATC is actually trained to issue clearances with items being in a proper and consistent order so that the pilot has an expectation of where to listen for certain details. If you're not quite sure you have any piece of information correct, always ask for clarification. And the best time to do that is always now. The longer you wait, the more likely you are to put someone, perhaps even you, in a bad position if you're not sure what you heard. When you're receiving a clearance, takeoff, landing, IFR clearance, whatever, be sure to listen to what's being said. And the reason for that is we often set expectations about what we think will come next, and we mishear the transmission that comes through. This has led to serious occurrences, including runway incursions, and that's a very serious item around an airport. But seeing past your own expectations can help avoid another one. So onward with this, required flight plan calls. Just want to cover quickly a few items that some pilots may not be well aware of as far as radio calls go. First, we'll talk about arrival and departure messages. These are required when operating on a flight plan because ATS personnel, ATC and FSS, are responsible for what we call alerting services. And this is when we would alert search and rescue and perhaps local agencies like police to go look for you if you don't take off or land in the time frame allowed. If you're on a flight plan, you're responsible for filing an arrival message. And that's whether you're IFR or VFR. IFR flight plans require filing both of those. At locations where ATS facilities such as Tower and FSS exist, these are often done automatically for you. You are free to ask if any action was taken on your behalf, such as just confirming that the flight plan was closed on arrival. Arrival and departure messages can be filed directly with FSS if there's a transceiver within reach. A phone call can be made to FSS once on the ground as well. Often, I think all of the area control centers have a toll-free number that you can call to close the flight plan with as well. They would be published in the flight supplement. Generally speaking, alerting services for IFR flight plans are provided by ATC and the area control centers, and VFR flight plans, it's handled by flight information centers. The items that you require for a departure message are aircraft call sign, flight plan, itinerary type, IFR or VFR, point of departure and destination, and the date and time of arrival or departure. So for position reports for VFR, I don't think very many people make these. It's like I'm not accustomed to hearing many anyway. Many VFR pilots don't make them at all, and IFR VFR pilots are often unprepared to make position reports with the required information. IFR, once being told identified, you can omit position reports, and we have such great surveillance coverage in the country now that it's you generally don't have to make them. But when you do have to make one, or when you do make one, include your aircraft identification, the position in reference to nav-aid, a distinct geographical reference or whatever, the time where you overflew the given point, your altitude, VFR or VFR over the top, destination, where you're heading, and reports can even be made after the fact. So if you passed a point 5, 10, or even 20 minutes ago, you can still make that position report with the time that you actually passed it. FSS will use position reports to update your flight plan, and in the event that something goes wrong, they'll use those positions as a starting point instead of searching all the way from your point of departure to where you are. It does save time when search and rescue personnel don't have to look places where you've already passed. So as an example of this, Alpha Bravo Charlie over St. John at 1204, 5,500 VFR, destination Moncton. Doesn't take much time. Still with radio in mind, we'll move on to emergencies and urgencies. As a reminder, the radio terms and their usage, we use pan-pan to indicate urgency and mayday as emergency. The state of urgency indicates that the aircraft is not in dire straits yet, but could if the situation deteriorates further. Emergency, well, obviously you're in that state now. That's priority number one, and all the stops come out for that. In either case, you're supposed to speak the term 3 times and then add your aircraft's call sign. This will get the attention of everyone on frequency, most notably the controllers. If a controller can't hear you, perhaps an overflight on the same frequency can hear your call and relay it to ATC. The triple repetition of it gives anyone listening a chance to copy the details that follow. So it's kind of like getting their attention. This is some important information coming up. Include the state of the emergency, location of the aircraft, the intended actions of the pilot, whatever you can fit into that. Now, in my career, I've observed that pilots in an emergency rarely use these actual terms. I have not heard Mayday spoken on a frequency yet. I have heard pan-pan, but it's often in the mindset of, well, I guess I have to do this, so I'm going to use this term. That said, but it's obvious usually whether a state of urgency or emergency exists based on what the pilot is telling us. That said, controllers may not always be right in that assessment, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that when I talk about emergencies again later. Don't be afraid to ask for information or assistance. ATC knows the cockpit has gotten very busy in any of these situations, and maybe there's something we can relay to others on your behalf so you have more time to fly the plane. We can look for weather information, suitable nearby aerodromes, whatever. Whatever we can do to help when you're in an emergency situation, we're there. Quick note about fuel issues. If you have enough fuel to press on to destination, provided you don't encounter any undue delays, it's defined as having minimum fuel. ATC will handle an aircraft advising of minimum fuel as being first if all else is equal. Controllers will not treat an aircraft with minimum fuel situation as an emergency unless specifically asked. If it is a fuel emergency, if you must land the aircraft at the nearest suitable aerodrome, yeah, that's a fuel emergency, and ATC will handle that as an emergency, and you will get priority. For airport operations, first, controllers sometimes give departure instructions. This is something that has been shown up in some incidents recently. These are not a takeoff clearance, but rather directions as to what to do after you receive your takeoff clearance. And that will come in a later transmission. So some examples of this would be on departure, climb runway heading to 3,000 before proceeding on course. Or right turnout approved, not above 2,000 until clear of the zone. So while a readback is not technically necessary, pilots should acknowledge these instructions. If you don't say anything, the controller's going to presume that you didn't hear it, and they're going to come back to you. So again, acknowledgement is as simple as saying the aircraft's call sign. That's assuming you heard the transmission all right and don't have questions about it. If you're IFR and receiving a change to your departure instructions, such as an amendment to your SID or something like that, those items do have to be read back in full. That's part of the IFR clearance. As an aside, just so you know, controllers in the towers try not to use the term takeoff unless they're actually issuing a takeoff clearance, because it's so easy for a pilot to hear takeoff and assume that's the case. So if you don't hear the word takeoff with a transmission from the tower, that's a pretty good indicator that you actually haven't received your takeoff clearance just yet. If ATC asks if you're able and immediate, Please don't agree to it unless you can taxi out onto the runway and commence your takeoff roll immediately without stopping once you receive that takeoff clearance. Using this term means that the controller sees a slim window of opportunity to get you out, and they're offering you a chance to take off to avoid a delay due to other traffic, perhaps somebody else landing. If you still have a checklist to complete, or you're not ready for it for whatever reason, just refuse it and say negative or unable, and the controller will say, okay, hold short, stand by. Moving on now, the AIM calls it en route ATS surveillance. Most people I know, controllers and pilots alike, call it flight following. It's not quite the same thing, I suppose. ATC may be able to watch over your flight and offer information to you as it becomes available. That can include other observed traffic, deteriorating weather conditions ahead, or something that happens at your destination airport, anything like that. That said, there are limitations to the service, and you really should be aware of them. Radar systems have limited range, and that range depends primarily on your altitude. Also, in most areas in Canada, primary radar coverage doesn't exist, meaning that traffic without transponders, or if they just have their transponder turned off, won't be visible to ATC. You are unlikely to be informed as to whether you're in an area with primary radar coverage or without it. So don't assume ATC will see everything. Aircraft with ADS-B will be visible over a much greater range than those without, due to space-based ADS-B coverage. Now, a little side note about that, the whole diverse antennas, an antenna on the top and an antenna on the bottom. The space-based ADS-B is really good, even for aircraft that only have a bottom-mounted antenna, but it certainly isn't perfect. So if they don't have a top-mounted antenna, there's an increased chance that they won't be seen. So in any case, you do have to keep a watch out the windows for other traffic and make sure to remain in VMC. Excuse me. Also, remember, keep a listening watch on the frequency, advising us if you have to leave it. They know you got to make calls off frequency, maybe passing an aerodrome or something, or updating your flight plan, whatever. It's just awfully frustrating for us to try to call a pilot and who asks for extra attention and then not be able to get a hold of them when they need to. Controllers may not be in a position to provide the service. The extra workload may be difficult to contend with. If ATC is unable to provide the service, you won't even always know the reason. Just like in a cockpit, a controller's radio not being busy doesn't mean the controller isn't busy behind the scenes. We have a lot of off-the-radio duties of coordinating aircraft movements. So it's really hard to say how busy the controller really is. So when you're requesting this service, tune into the appropriate frequency, give your initial call with just your aircraft type and your 4-letter call sign. This gives me, the controller, a chance to get ready to copy your information. Like I said earlier, if you just blurt it all out, you'll probably be asked to say it all again, because I'll probably miss half of it, and that blocks the frequency for other calls, maybe at an inconvenient time. So when the controller responds, state your details, hopefully including the items listed at left. In this, there, the aircraft type, point of departure, destination, and the altitude. The route could be important, because if you just say I'm going from point A to point B, and I see you're deviating off that line, maybe you're doing some sightseeing. So in my example, pilot calls, he says, Moncton Center, Cessna Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie. Cessna Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, Moncton Center. Alpha Bravo Charlie, Cessna 172, VFR St. John to Halifax, 5,500. This is the route part. We'll fly up the coast to Martin Head before crossing the Bay of Fundy. That's just so the controller has an expectation, okay, he's not going to go on a direct line, so I'm not going to query you if it looks like you're going off course. So pilots receiving this service should also be aware of the classification of airspace that they're in. This tells what rules the pilots must follow and what authority the controller has over the flight. That's kind of an important one right there. Depending on the airspace classification, ATC may assign headings as radar vectors. They may assign altitudes, or just place restrictions on flights, such as not above 3,000 or remain west of the river, something like that, if there's a river that's obvious. In airspace where the controller does not have the authority to assign or restrict your operation, They may offer suggestions as to how you can remain clear of other traffic. When ATC suggests a course of action, the pilot remains responsible for deciding whether to act on that suggestion. And please, if you choose not to for whatever reason, because weather stops you from doing it or something else, advise the controller whatever action is taken, even if it's not what we suggest. That way, at least we know what you're actually doing. Pilots are also responsible for remaining clear of any restricted airspaces along the route of flight. One of the things that has been more and more prevalent as GPS has made its way into cockpits over the last 25 years is it makes it real handy for flying straight lines. But we see pilots routinely flying into areas they shouldn't, restricted airspaces, military operations. And many GPS units don't show restricted airspaces or don't show whether they're hot in that case. They're not updated in real time. They are in some systems. I believe ForeFlight is one of the most prominently ones that does have that kind of update, and that is very happy for me as a controller. So just as an example here, here's a snippet from the Moncton Visual Navigation Chart, or VNC. CYR 724 showing right here, and never appears on NOTAM summaries as active because it's marked on the charts as continuously active from the surface to flight level 250. So pilots flying directly between Fredericton and St. John would go through the middle of it if they don't realize there's a live firing area there. And we see this mostly in the summer with low time pilots, but even airlines file this kind of routing. So even the professionals don't always get it right. We also have two smaller areas, CYR 721 on the east side of it and CYR 720 on the west side. And those are active only occasionally with their vertical dimensions as published on this chart. If you check the NOTAM summaries for your point of departure and destination, you may not see the NOTAMs activating similar areas along your route of flight. You have to check in between the areas as well, typically with the flight information regions grouping of NOTAMs. Another one we see quite often is pilots flying between Moncton and Bangor, because both of them are points of entry for customs. Often they file right through all these, and these airspaces and their details can be found on charts, and more detail in the designated airspace handbook. If you really want to dig into that, it's available for free on NAV's website. But just keep an eye out for those. The next one, traffic information. Whether you're IFR or VFR, pilots receiving surveillance services, meaning they were previously told they were identified, they may receive traffic information from ATC using the clock system. It's a bit of a running joke with the younger generation being raised on digital clocks, but I think every pilot generally understands, 12 o'clock is straight ahead, 9 o'clock is on your left, 4 o'clock is, behind your right, on your right and slightly behind. So it's important to note a few things. Remember, other aircraft will not be detected by surveillance systems in most airspace in Canada if they don't have a transponder or if they just forgot to turn it on. Second, it's based on your track over the ground, not your heading. So I'll try to demonstrate this. So first, we have our aircraft here. I didn't have an airplane symbol, so it's a bad joke, but let's just say he's flying a Piper Arrow. Northbound track for our fictitious radar screen. Now let's add another airplane over here. If we try to point out the green aircraft to the white one using the clock system, you can see that it's approximately at the white aircraft's 2 o'clock. Now let's add wind into the situation. So this wind is from the west. And I missed a couple of clicks there. There's the wind. So the wind is from the west. In order to keep the northerly track, the white aircraft needs to change to a slightly more westerly heading. So the problem here is now you can see the 12 o'clock is that all those positions have shifted. So now that green aircraft is actually at the white aircraft's 3 o'clock. I mean, in reality, drift this strong would require a very strong wind from the west to achieve like 30 degrees in the difference. But the concept is what we're trying to demonstrate here is don't expect your traffic to be exactly where the controller is telling you to look. It's merely an aid to help you find the traffic. And now, so some examples of phraseology that you'd hear. Air Canada 123, traffic, 2 o'clock, 4 miles, westbound, type and altitude unknown, slow moving. Alpha Bravo Charlie, traffic 12 o'clock, 3 miles, eastbound Cessna 172 at 3,500. The difference between those two is we're pointing out traffic to the Air Canada that we don't know what his intentions are, but we see him on the radar. Whereas in the second one, we actually know what the aircraft is doing. So just as an aside, if ATC keeps pointing out traffic to you and it's on a constant bearing, always at your 2 o'clock or always at your 10 o'clock, and the distance keeps getting shallower, that means that you and your traffic are on converging courses and your paths are likely to intersect very closely, if not exactly. So listen carefully to the altitudes if it's given, keep your eyes peeled, and be ready to take some action. All right. When ATC issues traffic information, don't bother reading back the traffic to the information to the controller. Instead, reply with your call sign in a quick and simple phrase. The two best options for this is they are traffic in sight and looking for traffic. We hear a lot of pilots, they have a tendency to say with the traffic. So I don't know what that means, honestly. We have some, when querying pilots on it, I have the traffic information. I'm looking for them. But the more valuable meaning is I have the traffic in sight. So when they say with the traffic, I need to know which one of those two it means. I'm probably going to ask you again. When you do report the traffic in sight, controllers will expect you to maintain visual separation from that traffic, turning, climbing, whatever you need to do to avoid them. But we're not going to keep pointing them out when you say you have them in sight. To that point, though, if you happen to lose sight of the traffic, please let the controller know reasonably quickly. So if the controller is expecting you to avoid them, we need to know that you can't see them anymore. So we can point them out, we can give you instructions, something else. All right, next up, we'll talk a little bit about airspace classification. You know there are 7 classes in Canada. We letter them from A to G, and A being the most controlled and exclusive, and G being completely uncontrolled. Services provided to you pilots, and the pilot's responsibilities depend on that class of airspace where the aircraft is being flown. In all cases of controlled airspace, IFR aircraft are subject to ATC clearances and instructions, and separation from other IFR aircraft will be provided by ATC. The weather minima for VFR flight increases in any kind of controlled airspace to help with the concept of see and be seen. So if you're in E, D, C, you have higher visibility minima of 3 statute miles, whereas if you were in uncontrolled airspace, it's only 1. This becomes important not only within control zones, but many areas of en route airspace as well, as we'll see a little later on. You heard me mention earlier the concept of transponder airspace. As again, this is separate from the classification of airspace, but any controlled airspace may get that designation. It might be Class D transponder airspace, might even be Class E transponder airspace. And that means you have to have a transponder with altitude encoding in it. So Class G, uncontrolled airspace, and ATC has neither the authority nor the responsibility to direct any flight, whether IFR or VFR. Weather minima for VFR is as lax as it can be in any classification. Transponders are not required. Airspace can receive Class G designation, whether it's high or low level. And for classification purposes in Canada, low-level airspace is defined as surface to below 18,000. Meaning that 18,000 is technically not included in it, and high-level airspace is 18,000 and above. Class E is controlled airspace, so again, it brings the weather minima up for VFR flight, and both IFR and VFR are permitted. Aircraft IFR will be provided separation by controllers, and VFR pilots are not required to be in contact with ATC in Class E airspace, and if they are, ATC doesn't have the authority to restrict or direct a VFR flight. Controllers may offer suggestions to VFR aircraft in Class E, but that's not conflict resolution, and the responsibility for seeing and avoiding other traffic remains with the VFR pilot. When in contact with the controller, it's good practice to advise the controller of actions taken, whether the suggestions are followed or another course of action is chosen, so the controller knows what you're doing. Provision of service to VFR by ATC depends on ATC equipment and workload. Airways extend Class E airspace down to 2,200 feet AGL, and where deemed necessary by Transport Canada, control area extensions, normally also based at 2,200 AGL, are defined to facilitate the control of IFR aircraft outside of airport terminal areas. Many airports with instrument approach procedures have transition areas established to contain instrument approach procedures and to raise the weather minima for VFR aircraft near those paths as they get into the airports. All of them are charted on VNCs and also described in the Designated Airspace Handbook. That's dry reading, but it's interesting sometimes. Class E control zones extend controlled airspace to the surface, and it's curious in that it's a control zone by its definition, but it doesn't mean there is air traffic control for the VFR aircraft within it, like at a controlled airport. A controlled airport is one with a tower in operation, but a Class E control zone means there is no tower operating. Many of those Class E control zones are mandatory frequency areas, so you have to have a radio to be in them. Just as an aside, transponder airspace, where you need the transponder with the mode C. Many Class E airspaces are included in that, including everything between 10,000 and 12,500 inclusive. That's all transponder airspace in Canada. Class D is controlled airspace, most often associated with airports and their control zones. And remember that an airport is controlled if a tower is in operation. Some of the busier terminal areas are also designated Class D airspace. VFR flight is permitted in Class D, but a pilot must establish two-way communication with the appropriate ATC unit. So in the case of Halifax International, it's Halifax Terminal that you would call, and you have to be able to talk to them. You have to receive a response when you call them in order to enter. If they don't answer, you can't enter. Aircraft without working radio or transponder might be permitted with prior approval from the ATC unit in daylight hours and in VMC only. In Class D airspace, ATC does provide separation between IFR, but ATC will also provide traffic information to VFR aircraft. If ATC workload and equipment permits, conflict resolution can be provided between IFR and VFR, and between VFR aircraft if they request it. This may be done by issuing restrictions to the VFR aircraft, such as not below a certain altitude or remain west of this particular highway or something like that. But in any case, if a restriction is if a restriction is issued that a pilot can't follow because of terrain, cloud, fog, whatever, pilots should refuse the instruction as soon as possible and advise the controller of the reason so that they don't try to send somebody else there as well. Class D control zones or airspace in general reverts to Class E when the appropriate ATC unit is not in operation. For example, if a tower doesn't run a 24/7 operation, their control zone reverts to a Class E when they close. Fredericton Airport is an example of that. Again, Class D may be designated, in fact, usually is designated as transponder airspace. The control zones around them may or may not carry that designation to allow pilots without transponders to get in. Class E gets a little more controlled than the preceding classes. VFR aircraft require a clearance from ATC to enter, not just a permission. So in Class D, technically speaking, if you call the unit and they say stand by, you have established two-way communication. And that kind of means you can enter. But Class C airspace, if you just hear stand by, that does not constitute permission to enter Class C airspace. Separation is applied between IFR aircraft. Conflict resolution will be provided between IFR and VFR. VFR aircraft will be provided with traffic information on other VFR, and they'll get conflict resolution if they request it. All aircraft are required to have two-way communication with ATC and a Mode C transponder when they're in Class C airspace. Aircraft without working radio or transponder, again, may be permitted with prior approval in daylight and VMC only. Class B, not most of us will bother trying to get up there, but it's airspace where all aircraft are subject to ATC clearances and instructions. Separation between IFR aircraft, between IFR and VFR aircraft, and between VFR aircraft will be provided by ATC. Communications and transponders are required, although operation within Class B without Mode C may be permitted with prior approval. While it may be established elsewhere, such as control zones or terminal areas, Class B is generally defined as all low-level controlled airspace above 12,500 to below 18,000. So what this means is that VFR flight must follow assigned routings. They must have the navigation gear on board to follow those routings and not just meander as they see fit. Essentially, you're treated like an IFR airplane on an IFR clearance. You're given a routing and an altitude, so don't turn, climb, or descend without a clearance from the controller. VFR aircraft can expect altitude assignments like those of IFR aircraft. So, for example, you won't get 15,500, you'll be assigned 15,000 on an eastbound leg. Pilot must remain in VMC if they're doing controlled VFR. If that routing or altitude assignment would take the aircraft into cloud, the pilot must either request a new clearance and hopefully detail why the clearance was refused so the controller knows. Or, now the AIM says you have to depart Class B airspace via the most expeditious means, including descending out of it or exiting laterally if such an option exists. In any case, the controller should be advised as soon as possible of the actions being taken. Not much of a reason to mention this for VFR pilots because Class A, being the most controlled, is all operations are under IFR. Everybody's subject to ATC clearances and instructions, separations provided. Everyone needs a radio and a transponder. All controlled high-level airspaces in Canada is designated as Class A, but it may be designated elsewhere, such as oceanic airspace is Class A from flight level 055 and upward. Now, you might have noticed I skipped Class F. That's special use airspace, often for military operation, high volume training areas, that sort of thing. As mentioned in the en route surveillance slides, they may be published as continuously active on charts, so keep an eye on that. They won't be noticed or published in the NOTAM summaries. They may also be published in charts and noted as occasional by NOTAM. For these, the pilot must check the NOTAM summaries to find their status. ATC will usually be aware of that, so you could actually ask the controller if they know it's active. Temporary restricted areas may be published by NOTAMs as well. They might contain a geographic description, such as a radius around a town or other specific location or geographic coordinates, ceiling and a floor if applicable, and a time frame of activity if it's not continuous. Class F airspaces can be classified as advisory, meaning pilots may penetrate the areas legally, if not safely. They may be restricted, meaning that you are not allowed inside without permission from what they call the controlling agency, and that detail will be listed in the DAH for chartered areas or in the NOTAM for ad hoc area. When an area of Class F airspace is not active, the airspace reverts to the classification of airspace around it. Now, I realize I'm kind of taking a little bit of extra time here, and I got a few more slides to go through. George, are we good for time? Do we want to take a break or questions or something?
I think we might as well just finish off, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Okay, I'll try to move quickly here. So we want to go back to the emergency assistance now and talk a little about what you can get from controllers in the event that things don't go quite as planned. ATC has access to a wealth of information, anything weather data, current observations, forecasts, SIGMETs, PIREPs, lightning data from Environment Canada, everything. So navigation assistance is something that we can provide in the form of radar vectors if you're in surveillance coverage. ATC is unlikely to be able to determine the exact positions or presence of clouds. Only heavier precipitation will show this, and lightning symbols will give us an idea that there's something there, but we won't actually know the boundaries of the cloud themselves. So if you're VFR accepting a vector, remember you're still responsible for avoiding the weather, and you should stay out of that cloud. Just advise if a controller issued heading will take you into the cloud, so they can figure something else out. ATC can also relay data on your behalf if things start going awry, like perhaps we can make phone calls for you. Your position can also be relayed to the Rescue Coordination Center if things go really wrong. Some tips that I've offered in the past for pilots is to review some charts during flight planning to find potentially useful information, such as where ATC has peripheral frequencies, also known as PAL, P-A-L, and where FSS have remote communication outlets and dial-up RCOs. I suggest noting these on your route of flight, something also relatively adjacent to it within a reasonable distance, considering your altitude. If you're lucky enough to be flying an aircraft equipped with a more modern set of avionics that has airport details and frequencies, I just suggest you be familiar with where to find that information quickly, so if you need it. Assuming you're carrying a cell phone, who doesn't these days, make a note of the phone numbers of some of the facilities you might be dealing with, like flight services, towers, or the ACCs around you. Yeah, if you keep that list handy, it could save you from trying to look it all up in the individual pubs while in flight, and probably already quite busy if you got an emergency going on. Just to show you where this is presented, on the left is a snippet of an LO chart or a low-level en route IFR chart, and on the right is the listing for the Area Control Center in the Canada Flight Supplement. If you click on or look at the low chart, you'll see the PAL is in a little box there. Montreal 135025 is listed there. And on the CFS entry, you'll see the name of the center with the locations geographically. And it'll usually put you, there's also a phone number in there, and that is for emergencies only. It'll usually put you in touch with a manager, not an actual controller, but they'll know how to get you in touch with the controller for the airspace you're in. For FSS, you'll see their RCOs and DRCOs listed on the yellow charts as well, as showing where a frequency they may be reached. And in the back of the CFS, each flight information center has a map showing all the locations that they have these. VNCs also carry a note for RCO and DRCO in a similar presentation to how they're drawn on the low charts. Now, if you find yourself in an emergency and need some help, here are some suggestions. If weather and circumstances permit, climb. This gives you more options for radio contact with controllers and perhaps more options for an unscheduled landing. Also, since like radar, VHF communications are line of sight, climbing not only gives you more options for radio contact with the ATC, but also it means you're more likely to be visible to the radar. If you can't reach ATC directly, FSS may be able to relay for you. They have transceivers in locations where controllers don't, so it increases the chances that you can talk to somebody, and they can always relay. Now, it's a fun joke to say the controllers can't help fly or fix your airplane, of course, but having a second set of eyes looking out for you can help you confirm that you're going in the right direction. With all the information we have access to, controllers can help you make better decisions and also help reduce the amount of heads down time for you in the cockpit, leaving you more time to focus on flying the airplane. And of course, worst comes to worst, we'll know where you last were. Now, we all make mistakes, and sometimes we all need a little bit of help. In the past, it's been very common for pilots to be a little bit embarrassed. They want to conceal their mistakes and hiding details that might be salient to the situation. But in any case, be sure to state your needs clearly. Few controllers have pilot's licenses and may not understand the situation the way you do. If you have limitations on your ability to fly or the aircraft has its own limitations, let the controller know. I mentioned the tone of voice in communications earlier, that we're taught to maintain an even tone and rate of speech. Studies suggest that words alone make up only 7% of communication. Tone of voice accounts for 38% more. And this can change the way a message is understood. So I'm not advising you go overboard and scream, but use tone as needed to emphasize your message. Just a couple of quick stories here. There was a student pilot on a night cross-country flight reported returning to Moncton Airport with a small problem with the airplane. Very level tone and really didn't convey anything serious. Some controllers would have left it at that, expecting that if it was serious, the pilot would have said more, said what they needed, and probably been a little more stressed out. I was working this flight, but I asked what the problem the pilot was having, and the pilot said he had low oil pressure and high oil temperature. And speaking to pilots, every time I bring this story up, everybody knows what that means. Air traffic controllers don't necessarily know what it means. Now, a few minutes later, after he was turned around heading back to Moncton, he just decided, he said, I'm going to work locally in the training areas for about a half an hour before I land. Now, a lot of controllers would have let him go because they would have figured, oh, the small problem with the airplane must be addressed, or maybe it's just not that critical for that operation, but it was for a cross country. But because I had that knowledge, I had to go a little further, and I told him, no, I really think you should continue on to the airport and land. And the pilot did so. Now, I coordinated with the tower and told them what was going on and said, treat him like an emergency. So again, he didn't say, I have an emergency, but we treated him like one because we recognized it. But again, not every controller would know what every pilot knows about their airplane. There was another quick story about the British stiff upper lip, maintaining that even tone and diminished sense of urgency. As I was leaving at the end of a shift, one of my peers turned and shouted to the supervisor they need a pilot with an engine failure. I looked over to the controller. I said, who's got the engine failure? The controller calmly pointed to the data in front of him. I said, that guy only has one engine. So obviously he jumped into emergency mode and found weather information, and the pilot did a successful dead stick landing, thankfully. But the way he said it was, Moncton, I've had an engine failure and need to descend. So the tone of voice kind of belied what was going on in the cockpit, and the calm demeanor really said there was nothing all that big. The controller just assumed that he would tell him if it was that serious. Now, the elevated tone of voice might have helped communicate it. Maybe a better choice of words, like my engine has failed, I am descending, would have been a better way to say it. Anyway, so try to be clear on what you need. Now, the last item that I had planned for this presentation is just give you a brief look at what you look like to us. To that end, here's a radar shot of a small piece of airspace near Moncton. So the aircraft targets are plotted as varying symbols depending on how the target was derived by radar, MLAT, ADSB, whatever. And each target has a CJS, that's the QM on the top of the symbol there. And the data tag is comprised of two lines in this case. It shows the aircraft identification, which in this case is Cargojet 618. The plus sign shows that he's a heavyweight turbulence category. And on the second line is the mode C, the altitude in hundreds of feet. The VMI is that little arrow pointing down, so it tells me as a controller that the pilot is descending, and that's at 900 feet per minute. And the ground speed is listed in tens of knots. So there's still, we can put a ton more information on that if we like, but this is kind of a common appearance of them. There's also a history trail that's plotted behind it. So that gives us a real good idea where the aircraft is heading based on where he has been. And it gives also an idea of the progress at a glance. Faster aircraft will have larger spaces between the dots. Turning aircraft will show a change in path that helps gauge how quickly the aircraft is turning. So a display can show controllers a map indicating lines, showing for runways, airways, airspace boundaries, all that. Symbols can represent airports and fixes, all references that we use on a day-to-day basis. Controllers have access to a variety of display tools as well, some of which are shown here. This is called a range bearing line. The blue one with bearing 133 and 4.7. The bearing isn't all that useful, but the distance between targets is. And we can draw that to a point on the screen as well. The green lines there extending out in front of each of those targets are predicted track lines. And so that's saying that if the aircraft continues on its current speed and on the current heading, this is where he will be in 1 minute, 2 minutes. We can set that display. So you can see in this case here, it looks like these two aircraft are converging and could be kind of close, especially if Cargojet were to turn right a little bit. But that gives us some tools that we can play with and see on the screen, and that's what you guys look like. All right, we finally made it to the end. So sorry for being a little bit long in the display or the presentation. You have some links there, the VFR phraseology document, and then NAV Canada's operational guides. I also have an email address at the bottom. I am very happy to take any questions, not only here, but if you think of something else and you have that email address, you can feel free to write me, and hopefully I can get an answer for you, because there's a lot of things that just aren't in the books.
Thank you very much. To say we have a few questions is a complete understatement. We have an awful lot of questions, as I think you find with these things. So I'm just going to go through them. If you need to jump off, I've included the link to the form to fill out your details for recurrency. I'll
I
get
am
a.
so interested in this thing, I could hang around most of the night.
I think by the sounds of it, there's a lot of people that have enjoyed it and want some answers. So let's start. Paul asks, Mike, do ATC controllers ATC-C get really annoyed if you ask them to repeat a radio call at a slower word rate?
No. Uh, what you'll get is the odd time somebody might be having a bad day. Maybe he's particularly busy and he doesn't like it, but he also absolutely will understand it. A busy controller tends to talk fairly quickly, and yeah, it can be easy, especially if the radio is a little bit weak. If you need something said again, by all means, ask to have it said again.
Does recycling your transponder do anything for modern solid-state transponders? I thought this was only useful for tube-type transponders.
Uh,
Good
that's a
question.
real good question. The current level of avionics, like what we have in my plane now, I can't imagine a scenario where it would actually do anything significant for recycling it. It did go beyond the tube types. That one I can say for sure. And the thing that I think that with the modern types, there is software heavily involved. So it's quite possible that there's a software glitch that shutting it off and back on might actually make a difference. I don't know for sure. I will say this, in 30 years, I have said recycle your transponder a lot less in modern times than in the early stages of my career.
Ali asks, when you recycle a transponder, do you turn it back on to the on position or to the alt position?
By default, I would always say back to the alt position, because as a controller, I would really like to see the altitude if you have that ability to report it.
Guy mentions recycle transponder in US means changing code. Is that a
Uh,
difference in terminology?
Not that I'm aware of. To my knowledge, that's a standard phraseology for us that means the same thing.
Do we need to acknowledge when we get the ATC message that we have been identified?
No. If you want to, just say your call sign. You don't have to read back that you're identified.
Next one. Unless I'm being mistaken, in the US, they prefer you to have your transponder on all the time, even on the ground. Why the difference? Don't they care about the clutter on their radar screens in the US?
Honestly, I can't speak to that. I do know that there are airports, especially busier ones, where they use multilateration, and that's one antenna sending out an interrogation pulse and several antennas at strategic locations around. And it's almost like GPS in the sense that when the interrogation pulse goes out, your transponder replies, and all the other stations that receive it code that as the time of arrival of the message. And they calculate he can only be here. Now, if that's employed at one of the airports, and busier airports will have that as part of their ASDI, then that's probably what's going on there. I would say most smaller airports won't have such a system running.
Paul asks if the transponder on your airplane fails, do airports have search radars where they can still track you? Primary radar?
Primary radar is what we're getting at there. That's reflected radiation. And I'm just, it's been a long time since I had the answer to this question, how many radars we have in Canada versus how many of them are primary capable. Like, so for example, in my region, we have radars at Sydney, Nova Scotia, the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, one just south of the Moncton Airport, and one at Halifax in Nova Scotia. And of those four, only two of those are capable of primary radar. So if you're out over Cape Breton Island, well away from Halifax, we won't see you without a transponder.
And there's fewer and fewer by the looks of it. It seems like something they're decommissioning.
Yeah, generally speaking, the busier terminals are going to be what keeps the what they call a TSR, or terminal surveillance radar, that has primary as part of it. most areas are going to be secondary only.
Got another one. Well, we have a few. Marcus mentions flight following versus radar surveillance and how to ask for it, but you did touch on that. Um, we've got a very good quote here. Engage brain before putting mouth into gear.
Yeah,
Think you'll
I wish
probably,
I could always do that.
yeah, I think you probably appreciate that one. Initial radio call to tower, wake up call or just lay it all out?
Um, I believe in every case, the initial call should just be the wake-up call. Halifax Tower, it's Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie. Get their attention so they can be ready to copy whatever it is you're going to say, so they can be in tune. I'm over this place, inbound for landing, inbound for touch and goes, whatever.
Mike mentions, is it possible to get flight following in Canada? I'm often told ATC doesn't have time, too busy. I think you touched on this and staff
Yeah,
availability.
yeah, it's controllers are often busy, and this is a weird one too, because I've known some controllers who absolutely hate doing flight following. Most of those are no longer working, by the way. They're old and retired. But sometimes having a pilot with you for flight following actually lightens the workload because, as I gave in my traffic examples, if I'm constantly saying traffic 12 o'clock, 5 miles opposite direction, type and altitude unknown, showing 4,500 unverified, that's a lot of words. And if you're with me and I know your intent, I've confirmed your altitude and what you're planning to do, you might not even be, it might not even warrant me passing traffic information on that aircraft. So you actually talking to me and telling me what you're up to can actually lighten my workload. Now, as what I say is our priorities is IFR control service, uh, VFR control service, where we're responsible for separation, IFR information service, and VFR information service. So as my workload increases with these top three or top two, that's the first one that has to get dropped because I only have so much time on a radio. So it might get to the point where I simply can't do it. But in 30 years, I have only refused flight following on a couple of occasions, and that was very specific because I know I have no other traffic up there where that pilot is calling me, and I just don't have time to watch.
Jason says, should I do position reports with FSS even if I have flight following?
I'm going to suggest there that you probably don't need to because at this point, somebody within the system within NAV Canada knows where you are. So it may not be flight services who's holding the alerting services officially for your flight, but if you're talking to a controller, the main reason for position reports, I guess there is a side where it's kind of valuable, is that if you're making position reports, there may be other pilots who aren't with ATC who are operating in that same sort of area who would benefit from your position reports. But as far as your alerting services and protection, if you will, if you're with ATC for flight following, you're on radar. That's better than any position report will ever be because it's updated every 5 seconds.
We've got a little bit of a comment here about declaring Mayday by saying Mayday, which I've done myself. And one of the things I notice a lot with the recordings in the States is that a lot of pilots won't say Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. They'll kind of be very casual about, we may have an emergency. And a few
Yeah,
times I noticed that the controller, if they're busy, won't necessarily pick up that it's an emergency and start giving commands that aren't possible because of the emergency. Um, the
yeah,
comment is, I think the advantage is that it creates a silence on the frequency that has all aircraft to stop talking and give priority to the emergency aircraft.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more. Now, I will say this, that in the situations that I've faced where the emergency was just obvious by the nature of it, I love the fact that pilots generally recognize this as well. And like normally, if at the top of my airspace is 280 and I've cleared somebody up there and he wants to climb higher, but he hears that somebody's in the state of emergency, and normally he'd be screaming for higher when he got out of 26 to make sure he didn't have to level off. But emergency, the pilot says, I'm just going to let this one ride. I'll level at 28 if I have to leave that frequency open. I find it a great show of airmanship. But yeah, the term somebody saying Mayday, Mayday, Mayday makes it pretty obvious that somebody's got something serious going on. And also, using that, it really does get the controller's attention to know that there's something there, even if you did the even rate of speech and steady tone.
Mike asks, in all parts of Canada, I identify my aircraft as a Skyhawk. In Quebec, they want me to say Cessna 172. Why the difference?
Good question. um, I can safely say that there are a lot of controllers who aren't really familiar with a lot of airplanes. And some people would find that bizarre because they think that shouldn't controllers know something about airplanes? The reality is there are so many different types that there's no way controllers could possibly be trained in all the specifics of any one of them. And one of the other things is controllers are usually trained to stay out of the cockpit. Um, so it's our job to tell the pilot where to put the airplane, and it's the pilot's job to put it there. So do we really have to know everything? There are obviously things we should know. Like we shouldn't expect a 737 to be able to drop down to 80 knots indicated, things like that. Um, but as far as them being really familiar with aircraft, less so than we might like. So somebody saying Skyhawk versus Cessna 172 or Skylane versus 182. I mean, I fly a PA-28 151 Piper Warrior. And as far as controllers are concerned, it's a PA-28, so it's a Cherokee. I see that comment there, Chris Law, flying a Comanche, not a Cherokee. Yeah, that's another case of controller just not really knowing.
Well, and I think the other point is that they're not necessarily being hired from an aviation background, especially with
Uh,
the hiring practices at the moment.
Most of them are not. Most of them do not come from an aviation background.
Giselle has a question. I'm a drone pilot. I was wondering if you have any best practices for drone pilots.
Yeah, don't hit airplanes. I mean, Nav Canada has an app out there called Nav Drone, and I actually quite like it. I was quite skeptical about it at first, but it does show airports that are nearby, and it does give you a breakdown of a lot of different things. And you can also submit. So if you're going to fly somewhere relatively close to an airport or something like that, NavDrone can help get you that permission to do it. For example, within the control zone of the Moncton Airport, I used to go to a camp for kids to demonstrate flying my drone. And all I would do is about an hour before I would go over there, I would just submit a request with my geographical area, my maximum altitude and radius of action, and a phone number where they could call me if they needed me. And I know they won't, because where I'm operating, if a plane is down low enough to hit my drone, he's probably going to hit the trees and buildings around me first. So less of an issue. But that application does actually help you in planning and getting permissions where you need it. The big thing is know where your approach paths are for any airports. If you have heliports nearby, like at a hospital or a police station or something like that, where you know these aircraft may be operating, be consciously aware of that, even if you're not using the NavDrone app to figure things out.
We have another one. Has any testing been done with top only mounted antennas in ADS-B? Top mount for best reception to satellites further away, but still good reception to much closer ground stations. I will speak to this briefly. We've had one of our previous directors from the Maritimes had no
Yeah.
choice but to install a top mounted antenna because he had an amphib. And those little spindly things, if you mount them to the bottom, they'll go quite quickly. So he had quite decent success.
Yeah, he and I actually talked about that quite directly here very recently, and I actually believed that he was right because most of the way the tradition for them being on the bottom is because most airplanes generally fly above radar antennas. But the reality is, you're so far away, and even if you're at 5,000 feet, if you're 15 miles, that's like a 15-to-1 ratio for distance. So the chances are that top-mounted antenna is going to be pretty well visible to the radar antenna unless you're pretty close to it. So the top mount, I know that isn't what they recommend as the basic, but it actually is fairly successful. And actually, to that note, on the other side of it, I should say, my aircraft has an ADS-B out, both the 1090 and the 978 UAT, and I watch my partners fly the airplane in my airspace, and it's only a bottom-mounted antenna. And we actually can track that aircraft through that ADS-B quite significantly through its path, like 95% plus of the time with only that bottom mount antenna. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good.
Bit of a deep question from Guy. Is ATC short-staffed?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Just as a prime example, I retired toward the end of 2020, and I've now been back for 3 years because they just didn't have the bodies. They need people. They needed people like me to come back and get them over the hump, so to say. But they are constantly training. They need people to apply. They want to run people through the testing, and they want to get people in the seats because people like me aren't going to be around forever.
Matt asks, any advice for folks with only one radio and airspace with complex frequencies? For example, the GTA Barry specifically has common frequency areas en route, people on flight following and many CTAF frequencies in a relatively small area.
Yeah, I find that to be a really complicated one. It's I'm not even sure exactly how someone would address that. Um, the big thing is familiarity. You probably fly in the airspace quite regularly, and you do you go through a series of frequencies, and you kind of get used to the order. Anticipating that is probably about the best advice I can give you. You probably know which frequency you should be on at any given time, and just being prepared for it when you got to get there. That's good. I don't have much to say for advice.
Jonathan asks, when flying from Saskatchewan to BC, en route surveillance over the Rockies seemed to drop off. Was waiting to be switched over to a new frequency and nothing. Radio to ask and no response. Any advice?
Okay. This it could be an issue of out of sight, out of mind. When you're going into the mountains, you're getting far away from radar antennas, and there's a lack of coverage for that sort of thing. And it's possible that if you dropped off the radar screen, they kind of forgot about you. I don't know the specifics on it. It's just speculation.
Jason asks, are those of us with ground-based ADS-B and no diversity still stuck having to replace our gear for CD&E in 2028?
Yeah,
Officially not before 2028.
yeah. I honestly don't know where that's going. I can say this, that NAV they've done a major review of surveillance, and they are planning to put in a large number of ground-based ADS-B receivers. What I hope that means for people like myself that just have the bottom mount antenna, that we don't have to go tear our airplane apart and put both in. But I don't know where that's going. I haven't even heard an official stance on it. It's like the official stance that I know now is the same one that you're probably expecting now, is the diversity by whatever their new deadline is. I don't know if that's going to change. It's always possible, and I have my fingers crossed as well.
Yeah, I mean, from our conversations with the technical team at NAV, it's a really daunting task. The thing with A and B, their argument was a lot of the aircraft, especially with TCAS 2, are already fitted with a diversity compliant solution. But I think once they look at the sheer number of aircraft in CD&E and the amount of effort that it would take, it's less of an adjustment to the current regs and more like introducing completely new regulations. So they've given themselves until 2028, and I think officially, unofficially, that's going to be pushed back even further because of the sheer amount of work it's going to take. So
Yeah,
something to
I'm
think about.
expecting that as well, but there's no good
We'll see.
information to go on right now.
Yeah. Until something's firm, aim for 2028. Maybe expect a little later. Thiago says, will this be available to rewatch later? Yep, we're going to put it on the YouTube channel. Norm says, transponder question, can you give a sample of what the conversation between a pilot and controller sounds like? Who initiates the conversation about a transponder? Does ATC ask you to squawk a code or press ident, or does a pilot need to request to be identified by ATC?
No, if you're calling in ATC for service of any kind, you will be told to squawk ident when they want to identify which target is yours. If they want to track your flight, like for flight following, then you will probably get assigned a discrete code, as they call it. Discrete meaning, in theory, only one aircraft is on that code. Part of the problem with the system that we have with standard transponders is the Mode A codes. There are only 4,096 of them. And I look at my little region, Moncton region, where Eastern Canada, there's not a lot of aircraft down low, but we get 600 to 700 flying over twice a day, the transatlantic flow. And each of those has a discrete code on their transponder. We see code conflicts all the time. And so we will sometimes have to get an aircraft to change the code. That would again be initiated by ATC. So an example would be I went over to Summerside today from Moncton, and I checked in at Moncton Center, Warrior Golf, India Juliet. They came back and said Golf India Juliet, Moncton Center. India Juliet 15 east of Moncton, 5,500 en route to Summerside, request flight following. Request en route surveillance, I guess is what I'm supposed to be requesting. That's not what I said. So they took a few seconds to put some details in for me into the system. And then they came back. They said, India Juliet, squawk 4312. So that's when I put that code in the transponder. He did not say ident, so I don't press the ident button. Now, other times, actually, the normal thing is I file a flight plan that goes through London FIC. That gets sent through the network to Moncton Center so that Moncton Tower has it. And when I taxi at Moncton Tower, where they normally use radar, I call them up and say, I'm ready to taxi VFR flight plan to Summerside with information Charlie. And he says, India Juliet, runway 29, taxi Alpha, hold short runway 29, and squawk 4312. So he's giving me all that right there. And it's different in the States. They don't always communicate the data from one unit to another, even over small spaces sometimes. And usually when military is involved, you're going into the airspace of a military unit. But they may ask you to change codes there. In the Canadian system, all the systems are managed together so that when you take off out of Halifax and fly through Moncton's control zone and fly through Fredericton's control zone and you're talking to center in between, different frequencies and everything, they'll all look for you on that same code.
Jacques asks, when going around a controlled area, should the pilot advise ATC due to proximity and additional situational awareness information?
When you're going around a control area, you mean like a control zone?
Yeah, either that or controlled airspace, maybe.
If you're, we get pilots who don't want to fly through the Moncton control zone because it's quite often busy on a nice VFR day like today was, and they would rather go around it instead of talking to the tower. It's actually not even necessarily a great idea. I mean, I was poorly trained to deal with ATC when I got my pilot's license 37 years ago. And I was taught that controllers are they're traffic cops just waiting to write you up when you make a mistake. Trust me, we hate paperwork as much as anybody else. But what I did as a student pilot is I flew at 3,501 feet over the Halifax control zone so I wouldn't have to talk to the controllers there because I was all up here. I now see it from the other side because I worked in that unit, but I work in other units. As a controller, I would much rather have that aircraft on my frequency so that if somebody's going to operate close by, I can point out traffic. So is it necessary to skirt a particular control zone? If it's just a matter of not wanting to talk to the controller, I would recommend you get comfortable talking to the controllers. If it's a matter of equipment, like it's the control zone is transponder airspace, and you don't have a transponder, well, that is a little different. There is a requirement there. But if you're going to check in, by all means, give a position and your intentions, and then they can tell you, hey, we know about somebody operating out that area, so keep an eye out for them.
John points out it, however, might not be wise to enter if the controller has said standby in Class D, which was something you pointed out. That was an acknowledgement of.
Yep. And I do know when they made that change, how long ago was that? That was in the early 90s when they changed the classification of airspace, and the Class D was now taking on that characteristic. That's what they told us to expect. And that made me, as a tower controller at the time, kind of nervous, because is this what's going to happen? And practically speaking, it hasn't been an issue for me from the tower's point of view or from the center's point of view, like in the Class D airspace or in the Halifax terminal area. If you choose not to enter, I would absolutely respect that decision. And I'm not going to tell you to do it. I'm not going to tell you not to do it.
Jason points out, note there seems to be an unwritten rule that if you are identified by ATC, you are cleared into their airspace without them saying you are cleared. I've specifically asked for clarification, and the reply from Toronto Centre was, you're already identified, so you're cleared.
Yeah, so when you get to a place like Toronto, you're talking about the higher classes of airspace, and I can see how you would get there. I can see how a pilot would expect me as a controller to say, you're cleared in, cleared direct the airport, cleared whatever. I can also see a controller responding to you with that, because you've checked in, he's identified you, so you do have two-way communication. You've told him what he wants to do, and he hasn't told you not to do it. Does that constitute a clearance? I can see how you'd have the discussion, and I think you did it right by asking to be confirmed or confirming that you had a clearance. I think you did it right.
Yeah, better safe than sorry. Alistair asked, is control VFR in Class B seen as a nuisance to ATC?
I can see some controllers thinking that, but controllers, they can be kind of stodgy sometimes and maybe a little obstinate. But if that's what you want, that's what we're here for. I've long said that the reason I have a job is because you're in the air. And my job is to provide a service to you. And if that's what the service, if that's the service you want, it's my job to do it. So really, it doesn't matter if I like it.
Alistair then asks, explain the best situations to say unfamiliar.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Alistair asks, explain the best situations to say unfamiliar. I'm guessing that's more location based.
Yeah, the most common one would be on a certain airport. Controller spits out a taxi instruction that has a lot of turns and stops and everything in it, and you're not familiar with the airport. You can say right there, look, I'm not familiar. And a term that I haven't heard mentioned in some time, but a term that still exists is request progressive taxi instructions. And that way the controller will lead you a step at a time. The taxiway immediately on your right is Alpha. Follow that until the next intersection. I'll give you more there. Then when you get up close to that, he'll say turn right on Charlie, and so that's good for unfamiliar. Now another one that's where you could easily be unfamiliar is flying into a new bit of airspace, and especially under VFR, because IFR you're directed, but VFR they could say cleared left downwind or something like that, and you say, look, I'm unfamiliar, or maybe they might tell you follow the river or something like that, and you say, well, I'm not sure which river you're talking about, so they might help guide you that way. But saying you're unfamiliar, yeah, that's pretty easy to do. Just if you are unfamiliar and you want a little more help, simply ask. Yeah.
Robert asks, do ATC monitor ADIS-B out positions?
Well, if an aircraft is broadcasting ADS-B and the position that you're talking to, the controller you're talking to has the data, then yes, absolutely. We'll monitor that just as clearly as we would monitor anything on radar. So, and usually, like in my work space, and I think most places across Canada now, um, we're using ADS-B and radar data combined. What we have is a system called Fusion. And like I take the 4 radar sources that are in my FIR. I take the MLAT at Fredericton. I take 2 sources from Boston's area, 2 from Quebec, 2 from Newfoundland, plus the space-based ADS-B and plus the ground-based ADS-B that we have at Halifax. And it builds one radar picture out of all that. And that it'll show me that. Now, ADS-B is generally considered more accurate than radar, even though our radars are surprisingly accurate. So it will give heavy weight to your ADS-B reported position. If you don't have ADS-B, it'll look at the radars that are around you that are picking you up, and it'll say, this is where the airplane is. I calculate this to be that from the other sources that I have. But yes, ADS-B, if you're broadcasting it, we'll see it.
On that, Victor says, I thought ADS-B in Canada was only in use in the flight levels.
Yeah, that's something that changed a lot. They were originally talking about it only being in Class A airspace, so flight level 180 and up. But there was a shift in philosophy from some time ago. Actually, as a low-level controller, a controller of low-level airspace, I was actually quite angered by that because where I want it is where my radars don't see. And that's a lot of low-level airspace that's missing out. And services that could be provided, it's safety issue in my mind, because if I'm talking to an airplane and there's another airplane there that I can't see, well, that's not good. But they changed that philosophy in the last couple of years, and now there's a lot of airspace. In fact, most airspaces in Canada now will use the space-based ADS-B to the ground to some extent. I have a couple of my airports that are not covered very well by SSR or the normal secondary radar, and but I can see it with ADS-B, and it makes everything so much better. I can operate faster, I can be more efficient in my airspace, and I can be safer because I can see more airplanes.
Christopher brings up a very valid point on the point we were just talking about a little while back. Isn't Skyhawk a brand, whereas C172 is an official make model? Civil Aircraft Register doesn't say anything about Skyhawk, Skywagon, Aerobat.
I don't
I
know.
think I think that's a pretty valid point. Because like a 150 can either be an Aerobat or
A
I think it's a
commuter.
patroller, commuter. There's a different designations within the overarching. I mean, yeah, Cessnas can go anywhere from 140 something horsepower all the way up to the big
Yeah,
engine 180 one. So I
yeah, and the same thing
guess
with the Cherokee. I mean, there's the
yeah,
140, the 150, the 160, the 161, the 180. Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe that's why there's sticky on saying Cessna 172 in Quebec versus Skyhawk. I don't know.
Bruno raises a good question. What makes ATC do or not Cador's report?
Uh,
It's a big question.
yeah, okay. So in every job, there are different personalities, and there are some personalities, fewer of this one now these days. There were some personalities that when they saw something go wrong, they wanted to file something. Myself, as a controller, my philosophy is I would much rather have a conversation with a pilot and talk to them and try to be helpful and help them avoid the problem in the future than write them up and let Transport Canada send them a letter. Now, there's an overarching responsibility. Anybody in aviation who sees something that is potentially dangerous has a responsibility to report it. So if we, as an IFR controller, notice one of our IFR airplanes cleared for an approach, descend below a safe altitude, I don't have a choice but to mention that to my supervisor. The supervisor will put that in what we have. I'm trying to think what it's not the Cador itself, but that's what gets it to Cadors. Um, But no, if I have the opportunity, I will let the pilot off the hook unless I get the impression that the pilot isn't listening to me and somebody else has to talk to him. Like, for example, I had one pilot a few years ago. It was a terribly unsafe approach that he flew, and he blew the missed approach procedure both in directions and altitude, and it could have been really bad, but nobody else was affected. So I tried to explain to him on the frequency in such a way that I could say, essentially tried to tell him, please review the missed approach procedure because what you did wasn't it. And he came up with excuse, and started getting aggressive with me on the radio. Like, my opportunity to help you has passed. Somebody else needs to have a conversation with you. So, yeah, that was one that had to be done.
Brian points out, despite your best efforts, Michael, you can't seem to retire.
Well, here's the thing. If I'm being honest, it was toward the end of COVID, and there were a lot of people saying that the industry wasn't coming back until 2026 and all this. And I wasn't ready to leave. I liked the job. I've always liked the job. But they were talking about possibly laying off controllers. And at that point, I had almost 29 years in, and I said, if my departure makes room for somebody else to stay, and my numbers I can make work for retirement, I got to at least consider it. And I chose to leave to help let somebody else stay. And then a year and a half later, they were begging me to come back, and myself and several others, because they just didn't have enough bodies. The traffic came back. It's now above pre-COVID levels. It came back fast when it did.
Eve asks a very good question. What is the deadline for 406 ELTs? Happy to take this one. It's November 25th, 2025, unless you are operating a glider, an ultralight, a gyroplane, a balloon, or an airship. If you're operating an airship, please get in touch. That's very cool, and we'd like to talk to you, at least for a magazine article.
I'm glad you had the answer to that, because that's not an ATC thing. I don't know.
No, honestly, it's crept up. That's recreational aircraft. So everything else that's kind of bigger than a single engine piston, smaller twin, kind of big twins, cabin class, turboprops, they all had to do it years ago. But
Yes.
For everyone else except for the ultralights and gliders and everything, that is 25th of November. It's a few months away, but it will creep up. You know how the summer goes. It started getting nice, and next thing you know, it'll be snowing again. So keep that in mind, because I think an awful lot of people will be buying them at the same time. So get ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Brian points out Winnipeg terminal is awesome. In my experience, they've always used the magic words clearance into the Class C terminal controlled area. Nice and distinct. I like that.
I personally think that's proper.
Mm. Yeah, well, it removes the uncertainty of whether you are or you're not. I mean, time is of the essence, sure, in a big congested area, but the worst thing would be just kind of incursion after incursion because of the uncertainty.
Well, and the other side of it is, if it brings up a question, the question should be answered ahead of time, because every question that comes up that I have to answer takes more of my radio time away. So trying to work efficiently, I should give a pilot every bit of information that the pilot requires right up front, so that it removes the ambiguity.
Rob asks, is request to transit the zone a correct phrase providing intent to fly through the zone?
Sure. Yeah. I would say that in and of itself, there's a little bit of ambiguity, because am I just going to transit, a couple of miles on the north side of it? Do I want to go right overhead the airport? But if you say to the tower controller, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, you don't even have to say request to transit the zone, because he'll know, or she'll know, that's what you want to do just on what you said.
Paul asks, if a pilot makes a mistake in complying with an ATC instruction, will ATC inform the pilot that a CODOR will be filed?
I'm not aware of anybody, any controller saying that a Cador will be filed. It's just not a phraseology that we would say. I don't think to say that I'm going to report you or any kind of phraseology like that. I'm not sure that I would say I would tell a pilot that I'm informing my supervisor of them. And even just me informing my supervisor, that's as far as my limit as a controller goes. I see something, I tell the supervisor. What the supervisor decides to do with it from there is actually on him. So even if you asked me, was a Cador filed, I probably won't know.
I do know, and again, not a controller and not experienced, but I do know that it's a similar mindset to providing a phone number at the end of the flight so that the pilot isn't rattled by the knowledge that there's going to be potentially something to deal with when they get on the ground, and it's only after the fact that it's dealt with, which is pretty, I don't know, it's kind of like the flight test. If you've failed something, they're less likely to kind of slap you on the wrist mid-flight and talk about it later, so you can at least try and do the rest of the test properly.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that if you're getting a phone number at the end of your flight, that something isn't being filed. What they're trying to do is call you and talk to you and explain this is what you did wrong, this is why it's bad, and this is what we'd like you to do in the future. It may not have been a Cador-worthy thing. And I see Sophie puts out a very valid point in there, a quick note on Cadors. She says they're also very important in helping NAV identify potential problem zones and trying to keep them from becoming worse. And that's a very valid point because one of the things, in order to identify what a problem is, you need data to support it. You can't just go out and spend all kinds of time and all kinds of money trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So, and that this has actually been a difficult thing for controllers because when we're trying to raise an issue and they ask us for data to prove that it's an issue, we get fairly frustrated with the idea of having to fill it all out. And we often stop doing it because we get sick of it. But then that takes away the impetus behind fixing it because somebody eventually looks at it and says, "Oh, look, Moncton Center hasn't reported this issue in 2 months. I guess it must be solved." So yeah, to Sophie's point, when things don't get written up, nothing gets tracked, and the problems can't be solved. So
I think that's what NAV has highlighted with conversations with us. It's less just random punitive action and more being
yeah,
able to
it's
collect data on.
what Nav calls it is just culture.
Hmm.
The idea is it's not to put blame on somebody, it's to try to keep from having other people suffer from it. So, yeah, it just by there being a report doesn't mean you're going to get a letter from Transport Canada or a fine or anything like that.
Just going to move to the Q&A section. How do I request surveillance termination?
Oh, that's pretty easy. Like we have a common thing coming into Moncton. There's training areas, and the pilots say coming up from Halifax into Moncton, they know there's aircraft in there, and they just say to me, Moncton Center Alpha Bravo Charlie, like to terminate flight follow. I'm going to switch to the training area frequency, and that's perfect because that means the pilot is going to go look after themselves in this busy airspace. They're telling me that they're leaving my frequency. And then we have it gives me an opportunity to point out as well. Yes, okay, just so you know, on radar, I see 3 of them in that training area ahead, this range of altitudes. Keep your eyes open.
Kevin says, I thought you could only shorten your call sign after the controller has shortened it. Has this been changed?
Practically speaking, that I guess that's the effect. But when you say, Cessna Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, and he replies and just says Alpha Bravo Charlie, yeah, you've already made initial contact. But if you look at the VFR phraseology manual, that's one of the things it talks about is the idea of abbreviating a call sign after initial contact has been made. But it's just the controller will abbreviate it. But it's not necessarily the controller absolutely abbreviating it for you or giving you permission to abbreviate it. It's already kind of established at that point for both of you.
Andre asks, should we still ask ATC to open VFR flight plan after takeoff clearance?
So VFR flight plans, that has changed. Once upon a time, you had to file departure messages and all that, and you did have to make sure they were open, whether you talk to the tower and ask if they had, or call FSS as soon as you get in range of one of their transceivers to talk to them. What they do now for VFR flight plans is an assumed departure. You filed your flight plan with a proposed departure time of 12 o'clock. They're going to presume that you departed at 12 o'clock unless they hear otherwise. So if you departed significantly later, like say 20 minutes, 25 minutes later, you can call up and update that and say, we actually departed at this time. Or if you depart early and you want them to know that, because otherwise the search and rescue will be based on your proposed departure time. They still want the arrival message. And this is where I'm not going to give you a very satisfactory answer. If you're going to, because of the nature of the systems that are in place in the towers, they will get a VFR flight plan that comes to them from the FIC, and they will mark your flight as having arrived to keep the statistics at the airport. That also sends an arrival message into the system, which should make its way to the FIC, who's holding your flight plan for alerting services. There is a simple fact that they don't always go. So it is really a good idea to confirm with the tower as you're taxiing in, or to call FIC after you tie the plane down. Just want to confirm my flight plan's closed. And I have done this on every flight plan, and I always get the answer from London FIC here at Moncton. Yeah, your flight plan was already closed. So I know that data is getting through from the tower. It's just it's gotten better. It's still not perfect.
Adrian brings up, for position reports, shouldn't the location brackets nearest airport or town be very first and last part of the transmission? In my mind, that's the most important part of the call. I don't know how many times I've heard a 2-minute long call without once mentioning the location of the field or town.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what I pulled out there in the presentation was what's on the back of the CFS for VFR position reports. I agree with you, though. It's hard to listen to a long-winded conversation and find out that they didn't actually say where they were. But yeah, there should be some mention geographically, whether, like say, if there's a nav aid that you're flying over, if wherever there's still nav aids left. Or a prominent city or a body of water or something like that. Something should be in there to give an idea of location, yes.
That's a very good point. I come from a world in the UK where you have to give a position report if you want any sort of a service, and but many people very quickly forget the list of things you're supposed to say, and it's usually a random collection of a few aircraft type, engine type, mother's maiden name, and the rest. Kevin asks, how much of Ontario is covered by ADS-B? Theoretically, all of it's space-based, but
Well, yeah, okay. So here's the issue with Southern Ontario is when they launched the satellites up there and started listening for ADS-B reports, what they found is anywhere that's very close to the U.S. border, the populated areas of the U.S. border, it's just a jungle of replies because every transponder sending a signal up and a signal down, they don't broadcast from both antennas at once. They alternate, and they're 1 second. So this half second goes up, this half second goes down. So what you end up with, if you have hundreds or thousands of airplanes flying, is a lot of messages, and sometimes those can be a little bit garbled because they overlap a little bit. And that's part of the reason having more than one receiver is because with two signals going up at the same time and being garbled here, they might be offset enough going to another satellite to get a full message through for each of them. But what they found out with this was that there was an awful lot of garbling of transmissions from ADS-B aircraft in around the southern Ontario, in the Maritimes, and even out to Vancouver. Now they've managed to change some algorithms and fix some things, and now most of the airspace in Canada with the exception, I believe, of the extreme southern portion of Ontario, can be done with space-based only and do okay. My area, that what they call that red zone, was recently almost entirely removed, only in the extreme southwestern portion where you're getting close to Boston and New York, where those signals can be received. But ADS-B, to my knowledge, is used in every center. It may require an additional radar hit to validate the position received by ADS-B. But if your aircraft is broadcasting ADS-B, there's a very good chance it'll be seen just about anywhere in Canada now.
Monty asks, please confirm that Class B now requires ADS-B. Yes, diversity.
Yes. Yes.
Andy, you've just kind of answered his question. He says, I have diversity with my ADS-B. Will I be seen coast to coast?
Yeah. I see no reason why you wouldn't be.
Michael brings up, try the wake up call in Pitt Meadows. You'll get heck. On the airport website, they tell you not to do it. Interesting.
That's interesting. So they just want you to launch into full transmission?
Time is money.
I guess.
Only so many hours in the day.
I can see this too. If you go in, like Pitt Meadows, as my understanding, is a very busy airport, and I can see them not wanting to take that extra time for a call. One of my pet peeves with some IFR pilots, we have one particular operator that it seems to have gotten around as a method of working, is they'll be cruising along in their airspace happy at flight level 240, and they'll call Moncton Alpha Bravo Charlie, Alpha Bravo Charlie Moncton. At Moncton Alpha Bravo Charlie, request flight level 200. Alpha Bravo Charlie, descend to flight level 200. Alpha Bravo Charlie will descend to flight level 200. That's a lot of talking for a simple request. And I would say to any of those pilots, you're already on my frequency. I already know who you are, where you are, what you're doing. Just say, Moncton Alpha Bravo Charlie, request flight level 200. And that cuts out half of that conversation. So to that point, if Pitt Meadows says don't do it, then I would say don't do it. That's obviously a working practice that they're trying to use to eliminate something.
Henry asks, are experimental aircraft treated any differently?
No. The only way you might see an answer to that, to the positive, is in terms of wake turbulence, because if you're an ultralight, there is a different wake turbulence category applied by ATC. So it might require a little more separation from other aircraft that are heavier.
I think this goes back to your original point of aircraft identification, is if you're a amateur built single engine piston 2 or 4 seat, it's probably in the controller's mind the same as a certified. It's just, similar weight category.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, that treatment, you'd be just like any other Cessna or Cherokee or Warrior.
PA-28, make it easy.
Yeah.
Andre says, should we still ask ATC to open VFR flight plan after? Oh, didn't I just ask that?
You did, yeah.
I just did. I did. Well, he asked it again. Andre, I hope that's sufficiently answered. I think we've got a last couple. I recognize it's getting pretty late for you there, Michael.
Like I said, I could do this all night. I don't
care. We just had a great question. Doug said, is it getting easier or harder to be an ATC?
In the 30, almost 33 years now, 32 years that I've been doing this, I have seen a huge change in my job. I've been in the driver's seat of some of those changes as well. We have far better surveillance than we had 30 years ago. We have better frequency coverage than we had 30 years ago. And we have better systems than we had 30 years ago. 9 years ago into Moncton Center, Moncton was not the first to bring this system in, but we jumped on board with it. I actually, interestingly enough, hated the crap out of the concept. And I said, there's no way this is valid. It's not going to be good. And what it was is we used to use strips of paper, 8-inch by 1-inch strips of paper to represent our flight data. And this was pen and ink, written down, and some units were talking about going to electronic flight data, and I just did not trust the power systems. I didn't trust the integrity of the data, whatever. And then I went and visited Montreal Center, where they had done this setup and were using it. And one of the guys, he happened to be exactly the right person to talk to because he knew all the guts of it and how well it worked. And he said, "Look, you're going to have to go somewhere else. I'm going to get really busy. I won't have time to talk to you." I said, "Do you mind if I watch you work? Because this is what I want to see. Can you keep up with this when it's busy?" And he obviously knew it very, very well. But the point was, he kept up with a lot of traffic with this. And I'm trying to translate this into my job and thinking, if I was writing on strips, I couldn't keep up with this much. And so 9 years later, we're very familiar with this system, and it is far more efficient for handling data, and it is much easier to get your head around, and you can handle more traffic because it's not as labor intensive as the paper strips once were. So yeah, that's another way that my job has gotten easier. We've also streamlined a few procedures and things like that. The job is much easier. It's not to say that it's not without its stress, that it's not without its complications. It still has a lot of those things in it. But as far as the job goes, yeah, I think overall it is easier than it once was.
It always surprises me when I go up into a tower at a relatively busy airport. It's even some kind of capital city international airports, and they still have the paper. But I guess at that point they've just got it to such a routine that, you know, they're used to using the paper.
Yeah.
It's good change. Matt, do you know if Nav Canada open to part-time hires? Probably not ATC.
Not for ATC, and that has a lot to do with the contract that they have with the union, and that this would be the same in a lot of places. There was talk about what they called job sharing several years ago, and that never went anywhere. And I don't know if that's something that would open up in the future in another future round of contract talks, because the simple fact is the system will all need people. And there's some young people who are sitting there saying, like, I don't know if I'm going to have a job in 10 years because this will all be automated by AI. Like, I don't know. Even if you had an AI system that was somehow certified to be perfect and could do the job perfectly, I don't think transport would move so fast as to get that during the duration of your career. So, I mean, there will be jobs in there, and with that means they need people to do them. They need hire people to do them, and if they can only hire so many people, maybe part-time does become something they address in the future. Currently, it's not.
Last question. I don't see any others, so this is the last one I can see. Mark asks, what is the advantage of ADS-B in remote northern airspace where most communications are through RCOs, like in pinpointing aircraft positions?
Okay, so there, in terms of efficiency, when I have to relay communications through somebody else, that obviously puts a damper on my ability to be efficient with aircraft. ADS-B out is not only beneficial to ATC, it's also beneficial to anyone who has ADS-B in. So even if I wasn't getting it as a controller or able to use it in any efficient way because I can't talk directly to the pilots who have it, the fact is you're broadcasting your position to anybody else who's out there who can hear it. And I can't see that as being a bad thing.
We've had no last minute questions. Thank you very much for the many questions we've had for Sophie and Michael's presentation. I recognize it's quite late for you, Michael, and Sophie. I see that you're still on, and thank you to the 150 or so of you that have stuck around to the very end. Yeah, this is with this some great questions asked, great answers. I've certainly learnt a lot. We have Sophie's details in the chat somewhere. Michael's is still on the screen. I've put the form for recurrency, so please complete that, and I'll send you a certificate to put in your logbook. any other questions, send them my way and I can send them to the right person. But yeah, thank you very much, Michael and Sophie, for your time and presenting to everyone. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you very much for having me. I find these things to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, please reach out if you have anything, think of anything overnight, have dreams of VFR phraseology and meteorology. We'll do our best to answer. But a good night to all. Have a great rest of the evening and fly safe.
Good night.
Bye.